You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 6,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipping through the mail slot of St. Catherine's Parish like a whisper. Father Matthias Corvain had been preparing his Sunday sermon when he heard it land on the hardwood floor of the rectory entrance. The envelope was cream-coloured, heavy stock, with a wax seal that made his breath catch in his throat. The crossed keys of the Vatican pressed deep into crimson wax. His hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside, a single card bore handwritten words in elegant script. "Come alone, tell no one, you have been chosen." Below that, coordinates and a date. 3 days from now. Matthias sat heavily in his desk chair, staring at the card. The paper felt strange beneath his fingers. Too smooth, too cold, as if it had been stored somewhere temperature didn't quite work the same way. In his 8 years as a priest, he'd never received direct communication from Rome. He taught Latin to bored high school students, heard confessions from elderly parishioners who repeated the same minor sins week after week, and tried to keep the church's leaking roof from collapsing under Montana's harsh winters. Why would the Vatican summon him? He examined the handwriting more closely under his desk lamp. It was old-fashioned, the kind of penmanship that belonged to another century. Loops and flourishes executed with perfect precision. No modern hand wrote like this. Whoever had penned this letter had either been trained in calligraphy from a young age or had lived long enough to perfect an archaic art. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay in his narrow bed, listening to the Montana wind howl across the plains, and wondered what he'd done wrong, or what he'd done right. His mind catalogued every interaction with his superiors, every letter he'd written to the diocese, every decision he'd made in his parish. Nothing stood out. Nothing explained this. At 2 a.m, he got up and made coffee, sitting at his small kitchen table with the letter before him. The wax seal had broken cleanly, but he could still make out the details. Not just the crossed keys, but tiny symbols around the edge, Latin words so small they were barely visible. He fetched a magnifying glass from his desk drawer. The words circled the seal in continuous script. Silentium est aureum, veritas est mortis, custos eris, custos semper eris. Silence is golden, truth is death. You will be guardian, you will always be guardian. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the Montana cold. The phrasing wasn't a request or an invitation. It was a statement of fact, as if his future had already been written in stone, and he was simply being informed of what had already been decided. The flight to Rome passed in a blur of anxiety and speculation. Matthias changed planes in New York, then again in London, each connection taking him further from everything he knew. He tried to pray during the flights, but the words felt hollow, bouncing off some invisible barrier and falling back into his throat unused. It was as if something knew he was coming and had already begun to separate him from the comfort of his faith. The woman sitting next to him on the transatlantic flight, a businesswoman in her 40s, attempted conversation once. "First time to Rome?" she asked pleasantly. "No, I've been before." "Vacation? Work?" Something in his tone discouraged further questions. She returned to her laptop and Matthias stared out the window at the clouds below, thinking about that phrase. You will always be guardian, not you might be, or you could be, will be. As if his choice had already been made, as if the future was fixed and immutable, as if free will was an illusion he'd been comfortable believing until this moment. By the time he landed at Leonardo da Vinci Airport, exhaustion had settled into his bones, but his mind raced too quickly for rest. The airport felt surreal, too bright, too loud, too full of people going about their ordinary lives while he walked towards something extraordinary and terrible. He watched a family greeting each other with hugs and laughter, a businessman checking his watch anxiously, a young couple holding hands, all of them existing in the normal world, all of them unaware that beneath the surface of ordinary reality, something else waited. A driver met him at arrivals, holding a sign with his name. The man was in his 60s with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. When their eyes met, Matthias saw something flicker in the driver's expression, recognition perhaps, or pity. The man said nothing, just nodded and took Matthias's single bag. They drove through Rome's chaotic traffic in silence. Matthias expected to head toward Vatican City's main entrances, the Grand St. Peter's Square, the official gates where tourists queued for entry. Instead, they circled around to a narrow street in Trastevere that Matthias had never noticed in his previous visits. The car stopped at what appeared to be an ordinary residential building, its facade aged by centuries but well maintained, with flower boxes in the windows and laundry hanging from a balcony. It looked like any other Roman apartment building. The driver gestured for him to follow. They entered through a wooden door that looked like it predated the Renaissance, descending immediately into a stairwell that spiraled down into darkness. Emergency lights flickered along the walls at intervals, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made Matthias's shadow twist and elongate in unsettling ways. "How far down does this go?" Matthias asked, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. The driver didn't answer. His footsteps never faltered, never slowed, as if he made this journey 1,000 times before and had long ago stopped thinking about it. They just kept descending. Matthias tried to count the steps but lost track after 300. The air changed as they went deeper, colder, drier, with a faint smell of old stone and something else he couldn't identify. Incense, perhaps, or ancient wood, or something older still, something that predated modern language's ability to describe it. The smell reminded him of opening a book that hadn't been touched in centuries. That particular scent of time itself, compressed and preserved. The walls changed too. At first they were concrete, modern construction from the 20th century perhaps, then brick, probably 19th century, then stone blocks fitted together with medieval precision, then stones so old and primitive they might have been placed by Romans or even earlier peoples when this hill was just a pagan sacred site. The descent was taking them not just down but back through layers of history, through strata of time itself, peeling away centuries with each turn of the spiral. After what felt like 20 minutes of continuous downward spiral, they reached a corridor. The electric lights hummed overhead, modern fixtures that seemed wrong against the medieval stonework, as if two eras had been forced together in violation of natural law. The sound of the lights was wrong too, not the steady hum of normal electricity, but a fluctuating buzz that suggested the current was unstable, as if even electrons didn't behave quite normally this far down. An elderly nun waited at the end of the corridor, her hands folded within her habit sleeves. Her face was deeply lined, her skin like aged parchment that had been folded and unfolded too many times, but her eyes were sharp and assessing, the eyes of someone who evaluated threats and weaknesses with practiced efficiency, who had seen things that would break most people and had somehow remained functional. "Father Corvain," she said. Her voice carried the flat affect of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore, who had accepted horrors as simply part of the job. "I am Sister Perpetua. Follow me, please." "Sister, can you tell me why I've been summoned? The letter didn't explain." Cardinal Tesoro will explain everything." She turned and walked away, her footsteps making soft sounds on the ancient stone, clearly expecting him to follow, without further questions. They passed through more corridors, each one seeming older than the last. Matthias noticed details that made his scholarly mind ache with questions. Frescoes that predated the Renaissance, their colours still vivid despite centuries of existence, depicting saints he didn't recognise in poses that seemed subtly wrong. Inscriptions in Latin so archaic he could barely translate them, speaking of duties and burdens and eternal vigilance, and prices paid in blood and sanity. Doorways sealed with what appeared to be lead, their surfaces marked with symbols he didn't recognise from any theological text he'd studied, symbols that hurt to look at too long, that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves in his peripheral vision. One door in particular caught his attention. It was covered in what looked like thousands of tiny scratches, as if something on the other side had been clawing to get out for a very, very long time. The scratches were methodical, organised in patterns that suggested intelligence, rather than random animal desperation. Sister Perpetua noticed him staring. "That section has been sealed since 1347, she said, her voice dropping slightly. "It must never be opened. What's behind it?" She paused, her expression flickering with something that might have been fear, genuine fear, the kind that comes from direct experience rather than imagination. "What's behind it is the reason we need guardians. The reason we've always needed guardians, for longer than the church has officially existed." Before Matthias could ask what she meant, she continued walking, her pace quickening, as if she wanted to leave that scratched door far behind, as if even being near it was dangerous. Finally, Sister Perpetua stopped before a heavy wooden door bound with iron. She knocked 3 times, a precise rhythm that suggested code or ritual, waited exactly 5 seconds, then knocked twice more. A moment of silence, then a voice from within. "Enter." She opened the door and gestured for Matthias to go ahead. She did not enter herself, closing the door behind him and leaving him alone with what waited inside. The room beyond was circular, windowless, lit entirely by candles. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their flames casting dancing shadows on walls lined with books and manuscripts. Some of the volumes looked so old that Matthias feared they might crumble at a touch. The smell of old paper and melting wax was overwhelming, mixed with something else, a scent like ozone, or the air after lightning strikes, or the smell that hangs in a room where something has died but hasn't been found yet. At the centre sat a man in cardinal's robes, his face gaunt, his white hair thin against his skull. He looked up from a manuscript he'd been reading. The text appeared to be in Aramaic, which Matthias could recognise but not read fluently, and his eyes met Matthias's. There were dark circles under those eyes that spoke of years of sleepless nights, of horrors witnessed and secrets kept, of a burden that had aged him far beyond his years. "Father Corvain," the man said, his voice a dry rasp, as if speaking caused him physical pain. "Please sit. I'm Cardinal Tesoro." Matthias took the chair across from him. The chair was old, wooden, uncomfortable by design, the kind of chair that prevented you from relaxing, that kept you alert and slightly off balance. Up close he could see that Tesoro's hands shook slightly, not with age or infirmity, but with something else, exhaustion perhaps, or fear held so long it had become permanent, woven into his nervous system. "I apologise for the dramatic summons," Tesoro began, closing the ancient manuscript carefully, "but what I'm about to tell you cannot be discussed through normal channels. This conversation, Father Corvain, is protected by the seal of the confessional. Do you understand? What you hear in this room can never be repeated to anyone outside this organisation. Not to family, not to friends, not to other clergy. The punishment for violation is immediate. Excommunication and..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And other consequences I pray you never discover. Consequences that make excommunication seem merciful by comparison." "Yes, Your Eminence, I understand." Tessero reached beneath the table and withdrew a folder. It was thick, stuffed with papers that had the worn look of documents that had been handled frequently over many years. But from it he extracted only a single photograph, sliding it across the table with obvious reluctance, as if the image itself carried some contagion, as if even handling it was dangerous. Matthias picked it up. It showed a boy, perhaps 8 years old, with pale skin and dark hair. The child sat in a wooden chair in what appeared to be a sparse room, hands folded in his lap, wearing simple grey clothing that looked both new and somehow ancient. The style wasn't from any particular era, just generic clothing that could have come from anywhere, anywhen. He stared directly at the camera with an expression that was neither happy nor sad, just empty, as if emotions were concepts he'd learned about but never truly experienced. But it was the eyes that made Matthias's stomach clench. They seemed to look through the photograph itself, penetrating whatever was beyond, seeing not just the camera, but the person holding it, and perhaps the person who would one day hold the photograph, years or decades later. They had depth that eyes shouldn't have, not the depth of wisdom or experience, but literal physical depth, as if he were looking not at eyes but through windows into vast, impossible distances. Matthias realized he'd been staring at the photo for nearly a minute. When he looked up, Tessero was watching him intently, studying his reaction with the focus of a scientist observing an experiment. "What did you feel just then?" the Cardinal asked. I'm not sure. Unease, like I was being watched through the photograph, like the boy was aware of me, here now looking at him years after this picture was taken." "Good. That means you're perceptive enough for what we need. Some people look at that photograph and feel nothing, see nothing unusual. Those people are not suitable, but you felt it, the awareness, the presence, the sense that time doesn't work the same way for him as it does for us." Tessero took the photograph back, placing it face down on the table, as if even he didn't want to look at it too long. "His name is Anselm, or rather that's what we call him. We don't know his true name. We're not certain he has one, in any sense we would understand. Names imply origin, identity, a beginning, and we don't believe he has any of those things." "I don't understand. Is this child in danger? Does he need protection?" Tessero laughed, a bitter sound that held no humour and even less hope. The laugh of a man who had long ago abandoned any expectation of joy. "Protection? No, Father. We need to protect others from him. Or perhaps..." He paused, choosing his words with obvious care, weighing each one as if speaking the wrong word might have consequences. "Perhaps we need to protect the world from knowing he exists. The truth about Anselm would shatter foundations. It would call into question everything we claim to know about the nature of existence, time, mortality, the soul. The Church has survived many revelations. Heliocentrism, evolution, the age of the Earth. But this..." He shook his head slowly. "This would break us. This would break everyone." The candles flickered as if responding to his words. Matthias felt a chill run down his spine, despite the room's warmth. Or was the room warm? He suddenly couldn't tell. Temperature seemed negotiable in this space. 15 years ago, Tessero continued, we conducted an excavation beneath the ruins of a monastery in Slovakia, the monastery of St. Radovan, to be precise. It dated to the 14th century, built by an order of monks whose records were troubling. They wrote extensively about their sacred duty, their burden, their terrible purpose, but they never specified what that purpose was. Just references to the child who does not age, and the keeper of doors, and he who must never be free, and the anchor that keeps the dead from flooding the living. Matthias leaned forward, his scholarly interest piqued despite his growing unease. This sounded like the kind of historical mystery he'd devoted his academic life to studying. Obscure religious orders, lost knowledge, theological puzzles. But something about the way Tesoro spoke suggested this wasn't an academic exercise. This was real. This was present. This was dangerous. The monastery was abandoned in 1782 during the reforms of Emperor Joseph II, when many religious houses were dissolved, Tesoro said. The monks simply vanished. No records of where they went, no indication of what happened to them. It's as if they simply ceased to exist. The building fell into ruin, but local legends persisted. Stories about voices heard in the ruins at night, about children who went missing near the site and were found days later, aged decades overnight, their hair white, their skin wrinkled, speaking in languages no one recognized. About travelers who took shelter there and were found days later speaking of places that don't exist, drawing pictures of architecture that violates geometry, trying to walk through solid walls because they swore they could see corridors beyond. Tesoro pulled out more documents from the folder. Architectural drawings, geological surveys, photographs of stone ruins overgrown with vegetation, pictures of artifacts that seemed to shimmer, even in two-dimensional reproduction. We excavated carefully. We found the monastery's foundation, then kept going, deeper. There were sublevels that didn't appear in any of the surviving documents, storage rooms filled with preserved food that should have rotted centuries ago, but looked fresh. Chapels decorated with frescoes that showed scenes not from the Bible, but from something else. Otherworldly landscapes, beings that weren't quite human, events that never happened in our history. A scriptorium where the monks had kept their most secret texts, written in a cipher we still haven't fully decoded. And below all of that, his hands trembled more noticeably now. Below all of that, we found a chamber. Stone, sealed with lead and blessed salt. The seals had been maintained regularly until the monastery's abandonment. We could tell by the layers, the different techniques used over centuries. Someone had been checking those seals, renewing them, ensuring they held. Generation after generation of monks, keeping that chamber locked. Locked to keep something in or something out? Matthias asked. Both, Tesoro said quietly. The seals worked both ways. Keeping something contained, yes, but also keeping something else away. We didn't understand that at first. We thought we were just being cautious. But the monks knew. They understood that what was in that chamber was both prisoner and prison guard. He pulled out photographs of the excavation. Matthias saw images of a stone chamber, maybe 10 feet square, lit by harsh archaeological lights that created sharp shadows. The walls were covered in more of those symbols that hurt to look at, and in the center on a raised stone slab covered in symbols carved deep into the rock. Inside we found him. The boy, unconscious, preserved, lying on that slab as if he'd been placed there just moments before. No coffin, no wrappings, just lying there in those grey clothes, hands folded, perfectly peaceful. No signs of decay, despite supposedly being sealed there for over 500 years. No signs of age. The team leader, a man named Dr. Volkov, one of the finest archaeologists in Europe, he actually checked the boy's pulse when we first uncovered him. Found one. Slow, maybe 1 beat per minute. But there, the boy was alive, had been alive, sealed in that chamber for over 5 centuries. But that's impossible. A human being can't survive without air, without water, without... He hadn't aged a day. Not a single day, Father Corvain. His hair was the same length as in paintings we found in the monastery. Paintings from 1347, showing this same boy with this same haircut. His fingernails were the same length. His clothing, though strange in style, showed no signs of decay beyond what might occur in a few months. It was as if time had simply stopped for him the moment those seals were placed, as if the laws of biology and physics had made an exception. as if he existed in a bubble where entropy didn't apply. Tesoro pulled out more photographs, medical reports, scan results that Matthias couldn't fully interpret but that looked profoundly wrong somehow. The images seemed to contradict themselves. A chest x-ray that showed ribs and organs but also spaces that shouldn't exist. Voids in the geometry of his body. An MRI of a brain that appeared normal at first glance but, on closer inspection, seemed to extend into dimensions the machine shouldn't have been able to capture, as if his skull contained more space than its volume should allow. We brought him to a secure facility, a private medical centre the Vatican maintains outside Rome. Doctors examined him. Scientists we trusted studied him. His body temperature was exactly room temperature, whatever the room temperature was. His heart beat once per minute, then once per hour, then once per day. The rhythm kept slowing. His brainwaves showed patterns no one had ever seen, activity in regions of the brain that aren't supposed to be active, or that don't exist in normal human anatomy. 3 weeks after we found him. Tesoro's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 3 weeks after we found him, he woke up. The cardinal stood and walked to the wall of books, running his finger along the spines until he found a particular volume. He pulled it out, a leather-bound journal with a metal clasp, the leather worn smooth by handling, the pages yellowed and swollen with age and moisture. This is the diary of Father Silvanus, the first guardian assigned to Anselm after the boy woke. It makes for difficult reading. He returned to his seat, opening the journal to a page marked with a black ribbon. "May I read you an entry?" Matthias nodded, though part of him wanted to refuse, wanted to stand up and walk out of this candlelit room and never look back. Tesoro cleared his throat and began to read, his voice taking on a different quality, as if channeling the long-dead priest. Day 14. I have been watching the child for 2 weeks now. He eats when scheduled. He speaks when spoken to. He follows all instructions without complaint or question. But he never sleeps. At night, through the observation window, I see him sitting on his bed, eyes open, staring at nothing. Or perhaps at something I cannot see. Perhaps at everything all at once. This morning I asked him how he slept. He looked at me with those empty eyes and said, "I don't remember what sleep is. I think I used to, a long time ago." Or perhaps I never did and only borrowed the memory from someone else. But now I'm always awake, always watching, always waiting. Every moment is equally present to me. I experience no sequence, Father Silvanus. I am experiencing this conversation, and also the conversation we'll have tomorrow, and also the moment 500 years ago, when the monks first sealed me away. All at once. Always. When I asked what he was waiting for, he smiled and said, "For you to understand. They all understand eventually, and then they leave or die or become something else, but they always understand first." Tesoro flipped forward several pages, his hands shaking more noticeably as he found another marked passage. Day 37. The child asked me today how old I am. I told him 42. He tilted his head in that strange way he has, like a bird, like something trying to remember how humans move, and said, "I was 42 once, or maybe I was 42 for 40 years. Time is different for me. It doesn't flow, it pulls. Sometimes I'm all my ages at once. Right now, talking to you, I'm 8 years old, but I'm also 800 years old. Maybe 8,000, I don't remember being born. I don't remember ever being any age except this one. But I've been this age for longer than your species has had written language. Does that make me old or young, Father Silvanus?" I asked him how old he really is. He thought for a long moment, at least, I think he was thinking, though his expression never changed. Then said, "Old enough to have forgotten the beginning, if there ever was one. Young enough to fear the end, if it ever comes." Another flip of pages, this time to near the end of the journal. Tessero's voice grew strained as he read. Day 89. I requested transfer today. I cannot continue this work. Last night I broke protocol and watched him for more than the allotted time. I don't know why. Curiosity, perhaps. Or some compulsion I couldn't resist. As if he wanted me to look and I couldn't refuse. His eyes. When you look into them for too long, you start to see things. Depths that shouldn't exist. Distances that can't be contained in a human skull. I cannot write what I saw. If I write it, I'll have to remember it clearly. And I'm trying very hard to let the memory blur. But I understand now why the monks sealed him away. Not because he's dangerous in any conventional sense. He's never threatened anyone, never shown aggression, but because perceiving him, truly perceiving what he is beneath the child shape, it does something to the mind. It opens doors in consciousness that were meant to stay closed. It shows you that reality is not what you thought. That time is not what you thought. That consciousness itself is stranger and more terrible than any theology has ever imagined. I applied for transfer. They granted it immediately. They're sending Father Dominic to replace me. God help him, God help all of us. But I don't think God sees this place. I think God looks away. Tessero closed the journal. Father Silvanus died 6 months after leaving his post. Heart attack officially. But the autopsy showed something strange. His brain had unusual structures that shouldn't have been there. Formations in the visual cortex that looked almost like eyes. Additional eyes turned inward, seeing something the rest of his anatomy couldn't process. The coroner who performed the autopsy requested a transfer to a different city the next day, and has refused to speak about what he saw. Matthias felt his mouth go dry. And the other guardians? We've had 46 since Silvanus. The longest anyone has lasted was 3 years. Father Ignatius, who currently holds the post. Most make it 6 months before they request transfer. Some, he paused, some last only weeks. And within 18 months of leaving, every single guardian has died. Heart attacks, strokes, disappearances where bodies were never found. Suicides that looked like suicides but included details that made no sense. Men hanging themselves in rooms with ceilings too low, or drowning in empty bathtubs, or falling from ground floor windows. All things that couldn't possibly be suicides. A priest found dead in his bed, apparently of old age despite being only 40 years old and in perfect health the day before. Then, why are you asking me to do this? Why would anyone agree to serve knowing they'll die within 2 years? Because the alternative is worse. Tessero's voice was heavy with conviction. What we've learned about Anselm is this. He cannot be killed. We've tried. Not recently. We learned our lesson centuries ago. But 23 times in recorded history, someone has tried to destroy him. In 1347, a warlord tried to execute him, believing he was a demon. Everyone in the warlord's camp, 300 soldiers, died in their sleep within 2 days. No wounds, no obvious cause. They simply stopped living. In 1583, witch hunters tried to burn him. The boy sat in the flames unharmed, while the fire raged around him. 300 townspeople died that night, not in the fire, but in their homes, in their beds, miles from the flames. In 1782, the monks made one final attempt to end him before they abandoned the monastery. The only survivor wrote about it before he vanished. We tried to end the child's existence. He sat calmly while we prepared the poison. He drank it without complaint. He smiled at us and said, "This won't work. It never works. But I understand why you have to try." And then, nothing happened to him. But that night, our brothers began to change. Their eyes turned inward. Their mouths spoke of places that have no names. By morning, they were gone. Not dead. Gone. As if they had never existed at all. As if reality had edited them out. but I remember them. I'm the only one who remembers. The child remained, unchanged, smiling that terrible empty smile. And now I must leave before I'm erased too. Tessero spread more documents across the table, medieval manuscripts, papal bulls, reports from various eras, all describing the same phenomena. Each account was different in details, but identical in conclusion. Attempting to harm Anselm triggered consequences that killed everyone nearby, quickly and inevitably, so you imprison him instead. We keep him safe, protected, isolated, and we assign guardians to watch over him, to maintain his connection to this reality, to keep him anchored in the human world through regular interaction and ritual. Tessero met Matthias's eyes directly, because we've learned one more crucial thing. When Anselm is left alone for extended periods, reality itself begins to fray around him. 3 times we've left the post vacant for more than a month while we search for a replacement. Each time people in nearby areas reported seeing things, figures from their past appearing solid and real, visions of their own futures that later came true, spaces that shouldn't exist, buildings that weren't there the day before, doors that opened into rooms that couldn't fit inside the structures that contained them, time skips where people lost hours or days, animals behaving impossibly, birds flying backward, dogs walking through walls, fish swimming through air. It's as if Anselm's presence, unmediated by human contact, begins to bleed into the world around him, changing it in ways that violate natural law. The guardians don't just watch him, they anchor him. They keep him focused on maintaining the pretense of being human. Without that anchor, he drifts. And when he drifts, the boundaries between what is and what could be start to dissolve. So we're sacrifices, human anchors offered up to keep him stable, knowing it will kill us. Yes, Tessero said simply. I won't lie to you, Father Corvain. This assignment will change you. It will probably kill you, eventually, within 18 months of when you leave. But while you serve, you'll be keeping something terrible at bay. You'll be maintaining a barrier between our world and something else. Something that should never fully manifest here. You'll be saving billions of people who will never know you did it, who will never thank you, who will go about their lives completely unaware that reality itself required your sacrifice to remain stable. What is he, really? We have theories, none of them are comforting. Tessero pulled out one final document, a theological treatise written in Latin, dated to the 16th century, pages brittle with age. Some believe he's a punishment from God, a living reminder of human mortality placed among us to teach humility, though that doesn't explain why harming him kills innocents. Others think he's a failed angel, something that was meant to ascend to heaven, but got stuck halfway between states, trapped in the physical world, but not fully of it. A few radical theologians, ones we've since silenced, have suggested he's from somewhere else entirely. Not heaven, not hell, but a third place we don't have names for. A place that exists adjacent to our reality, where time and space work differently, where the rules we take for granted simply don't apply, where beings can exist without beginning or end, without growth or decay, just existing eternally in all moments simultaneously, experiencing every second of time at once in an eternal present that never moves forward or backward, but just is. And what do you believe? Tessero was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, as if seeing something beyond the candlelit room. I believe that some questions are too dangerous to answer. I believe that Anselm is a mystery we were never meant to solve. I believe that there are things in creation that exist outside God's plan, or perhaps predate God's plan, that simply are and have always been and will always be. And I believe that you, Father Corvain, have the strength to do what needs to be done. Your psychological evaluations show exceptional mental discipline. Your military service as a chaplain demonstrates courage under pressure and the ability to maintain composure in life-threatening situations. Your faith is strong but not rigid. You can accept mystery without needing to solve it, can live with unanswered questions. Your expertise in ancient languages might prove useful and... He hesitated. Your family situation makes you suitable. What does my family have to do with this? You have no close living relatives, no parents, no siblings since your brother's death, no spouse, no children. The people who care about you are few and far between. I'm sorry to be blunt, Father, but guardians need to be expendable. When they die, as they inevitably do, we need the aftermath to be manageable. Minimal questions, minimal investigation. A priest with a large family, with many friends, with connections. Their strange death would draw attention, would spark investigations, would risk exposure. But you could disappear tomorrow, and perhaps a dozen people would attend your funeral. Perhaps fewer. No one would dig too deep. No one would demand answers we cannot give. The words should have offended him, should have sparked anger or indignation. Instead, Matthias just felt tired. Tessero was right. He'd built his life around service and isolation. He'd chosen the priesthood partly because he had nothing else, no reason to stay in the secular world. And now that choice, that isolation, was about to cost him everything. There are rules, Father Corvain, Tessero continued. Rules that must be followed absolutely. Break them and the consequences are severe. Not just for you, for everyone around you, for reality itself. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. The rules exist because previous guardians learned through terrible experience what happens when they're broken. Each rule is written in someone's blood, someone's sanity, someone's soul. Father Ignatius has maintained detailed records. He'll explain everything. You'll meet him tomorrow at the villa where Anselm is kept. Tonight you'll stay here in our guest quarters. Pray, if you wish. Prepare yourself mentally and spiritually. Say goodbye to the man you were, because that man will not survive this assignment. Someone else will leave that villa when your term is complete. Someone changed, someone marked, someone who is seen behind the curtain of reality and can never unsee it. Because once you accept this duty, Father Corvain, there is no turning back until your term is complete, or until... He trailed off. Until I die. Yes, until then. Matthias looked again at the upside-down photograph on the table, seeing just the white backing of the photo paper, but somehow he could still feel those eyes looking at him, perceiving him across distance and time, knowing he was here, knowing he was coming, knowing everything that would happen because, for Anselm, it had already happened, was happening now, would always be happening in an eternal present that contained all moments. Do I have a choice? There is always a choice, Father. Free will is the one gift God never rescinds, no matter how terrible the consequences. But we chose you because we believe you will make the right one. The Church needs you. God needs you. If God is still watching this place, still aware of what we do in these depths, that boy... Tessero's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That thing needs someone with a strong soul to contain it, to keep it human, or as close to human as it can pretend to be. Without guardians, without that human connection, it drifts back toward what it really is. And if it drifts too far, if it forgets entirely how to be a child, how to maintain that form, we don't know what will happen. But every instinct, every prophecy, every vision the sensitives have had, tells us it would be catastrophic. Not just deaths, not just localized reality breakdown, but something worse, something final. Matthias spent the night in a small cell-like room deep in the Vatican's subterranean levels. A crucifix hung on the wall, ancient, Byzantine, the Christ figure stylized and strange. the suffering depicted in ways that seemed almost alien to modern sensibilities. A small bed with a thin mattress, a wooden chair that looked older than America, a desk with a Bible and a rosary that felt strangely heavy in his hands. He prayed the rosary until his fingers ached, the beads leaving red marks in his palms, trying to find comfort in the familiar prayers. But the words felt hollow, bouncing off some invisible barrier and falling back into his throat unused. Hail Mary, full of grace. But what grace could exist in a world where things like Anselm existed? Creatures that violated every theological category, that called into question the fundamental structure of reality itself, that suggested everything the church taught about the nature of existence might be incomplete at best, utterly wrong at worst. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photograph. Those empty eyes staring through time and space, seeing him, knowing him, waiting for him with the patience of something that experienced all moments simultaneously and therefore never had to wait at all because the future was just as present as the past. At 3 a.m, he gave up trying to rest. He sat at the desk and opened the Bible, letting it fall open at random. A practice he normally avoided as too superstitious, but tonight it felt appropriate, as if he needed to surrender control, to let something other than his rational mind make decisions. The pages fell open to the book of Daniel, chapter 10, verse 5. He read, "I looked up and saw a man dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Upaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude." I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves, so I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left, my face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Matthias closed the Bible, his hands shaking. The passage felt like a warning, or a prophecy, or perhaps a description of what he was about to experience. Some things were not meant to be seen by human eyes. Some truths were too terrible for mortal minds to process, and yet prophets and mystics throughout history had looked anyway, had gazed upon the ineffable, and been forever changed by what they witnessed, marked by the experience in ways that separated them from the rest of humanity forever. Was that what he was being asked to do? To be a witness to something that should not be witnessed? To gaze upon Anselm and maintain his sanity just long enough to keep the world safe from whatever the boy really was? Morning arrived too quickly, though Matthias couldn't have said exactly when night ended, and day began in this windowless room so far beneath the earth. Sister Perpetua collected him without a word, her face revealing nothing. They ate a silent breakfast in a refectory where a handful of other clergy sat at distant tables, none of them speaking, all of them looking as haunted as Matthias felt. He wondered how many of them knew about Anselm, how many were involved in this secret. How far did the conspiracy extend? After breakfast, she led him back up through the maze of tunnels to the surface world. The climb took nearly as long as the descent had, and with each level they ascended, Matthias felt reality become more solid, more normal. The air warmed, the sounds of the modern world filtered in. Traffic, voices, the rumble of Rome going about its business. By the time they emerged into a Vatican courtyard, sunlight nearly blinding, after the underground dimness, he could almost believe the previous night had been a dream. Almost. A car waited, different from yesterday's, newer, with a different driver. This one was younger, perhaps 30, and he looked at Matthias with open pity when their eyes met. Sister Perpetua handed him a small leather bag. "Your belongings from the guest room," she said, "and a few items you'll need. A new Bible, a rosary blessed by His Holiness himself, and..." She reached into her habit and withdrew a small vial of clear liquid, pressing it into his palm. "Holy water from Lourdes. Keep it with you always. If things become unbearable, if you feel yourself slipping too far into whatever he shows you, pour it on your forehead and pray. It won't save you. Nothing can save you once you've seen too much. But it might give you a few more moments of clarity, a few more seconds to remember who you were before you understood what he is. Has it saved anyone? No, but several guardians reported it helped at the end. Gave them peace, if nothing else. Let them die as priests rather than as whatever they were becoming. She made the sign of the cross over him, her hand trembling slightly. God be with you, Father Corvain. You walk into darkness now. Try to remember the light. Try to remember who you were before you meet him. Because you'll need that memory later. When you start to forget. When he starts to replace your memories with his truth. When you can no longer tell where you end and he begins. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the Vatican's depths, leaving Matthias standing in the courtyard with a driver who wouldn't meet his eyes. The drive north took 3 hours. They left Rome behind, the ancient city giving way to countryside, rolling hills covered in vineyards and olive groves, small villages of ochre stone that looked unchanged since the Renaissance. They passed through towns with names Matthias recognized from history books, places where saints had lived and miracles had occurred, where the church had deep roots and long memory. But the driver didn't stop, just kept following increasingly narrow roads, moving away from civilization, away from witnesses, away from the modern world. They turned onto a private road marked with a simple sign, Proprietà privata, vietato l'ingresso. Private property, no entry. The road wound through dense forest for another 20 minutes before the trees opened up and the villa appeared. It was beautiful, Matthias had to admit that, a restored Renaissance building of honey-coloured stone, 3 stories tall, with elegant proportions and architectural details that spoke of wealth and taste, surrounded by high walls topped with what looked like ordinary, decorative ironwork, wrought iron designs of vines and flowers, the kind you'd see on any expensive Italian property. But Matthias noticed the cameras, discreetly placed at regular intervals, and the gate that slid open automatically as they approached, operated by unseen watchers, and the way the driver's shoulders relaxed slightly once they were through the gate, as if he'd been holding his breath until that moment, as if the walls provided protection from something outside, or perhaps contained something inside. The grounds were immaculate. Gardens bloomed with late spring flowers, roses, lavender, jasmine, their scents almost overpowering in the warm air. A fountain splashed merrily in the central courtyard, cherubs frozen in stone celebration around its base, water catching the sunlight in prismatic sprays. Birds sang in the ancient olive trees that dotted the landscape, nightingales and wrens and species Matthias couldn't identify. It looked like a postcard, a perfect Italian retreat where wealthy Romans might spend their summer holidays, where nothing bad could ever happen. Only the silence gave it away. Despite the birdsong, despite the splashing water, there was a quality to the quiet that felt wrong, as if sound itself behaved differently here, as if the air was thicker, dampening vibrations before they could travel too far. As if the villa existed in a pocket of reality where normal rules applied only approximately. Father Ignatius waited at the villa's entrance, and Matthias felt his breath catch when he saw the man. The file photo had shown a vital man of perhaps 35, strong features, clear eyes, the look of someone comfortable in his own skin. The person standing before him now looked 60, maybe older. His face was lined with stress that went deeper than ordinary aging, grooves carved by experiences that had nothing to do with the passage of time. His hair was prematurely grey, almost white at the temples, and receding in patterns that suggested stress rather than genetics. His hands shook constantly, trembling with a palsy that made him fumble with the cigarette he was smoking. When their eyes met, Matthias saw defeat. Absolute, complete defeat. The look of someone who had fought a battle they could never win and had finally accepted that fact. He took a long drag when he saw Matthias emerge from the car, then crushed the cigarette beneath his heel with more violence than necessary, grinding it into the gravel of the driveway as if trying to obliterate it from existence. Father Corvain. Ignatius's voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse and strained, as if screaming had damaged his vocal cords. Welcome to your new assignment. I wish I could tell you it won't be as bad as you're imagining, but I'd be lying. And I've decided to stop lying about this place, stop pretending it's manageable, that the rules are sufficient, that following protocol will keep you safe. It's not. They're not. It won't. This place destroys you. Slowly, methodically, inevitably. Like a disease that has no cure, only progression. They stood in the entrance hall while Ignatius spoke, surrounded by beautiful frescoes of pastoral scenes, shepherds watching their flocks, saints receiving divine visions, angels descending from stylized heavens. Elegant furniture that looked original to the villa's construction 400 years ago. Everything spoke of civilization, refinement, culture. The beauty of the surroundings made his words seem even more terrible. The contrast between appearance and reality, too stark to process. How long have you been here? Matthias asked. 2 years, 1 month, and 17 days. Ignatius recited it like a prisoner counting days until release. The longest anyone has lasted was 3 years, Father Dominic, and he was completely non-functional by the end. Couldn't speak in coherent sentences. Couldn't remember his own name some days. Couldn't tell the difference between memories and visions. Most make it 6 months before they request transfer. Some. He paused, lighting another cigarette with shaking hands. Some last only weeks. Father Lucien lasted 3 weeks. Father Callisto made it a month. They saw too much too quickly, broke too many rules before they understood why the rules existed. What happens to them, the ones who leave early? Ignatius exhaled smoke slowly, watching it rise toward the frescoed ceiling. They die faster. The exposure is too concentrated. Their minds can't process it, can't integrate it. They fragment, come apart. Father Lucien was found dead in his apartment 2 months after leaving. Officially heart failure, but the priest who found him said his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, and his eyes were open but looking at something that wasn't there, or something that was there but no one else could see. Father Callisto lasted 4 months, jumped from a bridge, left a note that was just the same symbol drawn over and over, one of the symbols from Anselm's drawings, one of the ones that hurt to look at. The note covered 20 pages, nothing but that symbol drawn with increasing precision, as if he was trying to perfect it, as if getting it exactly right would somehow free him from what he'd seen. And you? You've lasted 2 years. How? By following the rules, obsessively, religiously. Every second counted when looking at him. Every meal at exactly the right time. Every question answered with only yes or no. No matter how much he pressed, every drawing burned immediately, every impossible thing treated as normal. His hands shook worse as he remembered. But even following the rules perfectly, you still deteriorate, just slower. The exposure accumulates. You see more each week, understand more, perceive more of what he really is beneath the child shape. And that perception changes you, marks you, makes you visible to things that normally can't see humans, things that exist in the spaces between moments, things that are always hungry. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages swollen with writing and loose papers tucked between them. The leather was worn smooth by constant handling, darkened by the oils from anxious fingers. Everything you need to know is here. Everything I learned, everything I observed, everything I wish someone had told me more clearly on my first day. Read it carefully, Father Corvain. Your life depends on it. Your sanity depends on it. Your soul depends on it, though in the end... He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and broken. In the end, none of those things will save you, but at least you'll last longer than you would without the rules. At least you'll die knowing you tried. The journal felt heavy in Matthias's hands, weighted with more than just paper and ink. It was warm, as if Ignatius had been holding it close to his body, and Matthias could feel the texture of the binding, worn smooth in some places, rough in others where Ignatius had gripped it during moments of stress or terror. Where is he? The boy? Anselm is in his room, second floor, end of the hall. He knows you're here. He always knows. Ignatius moved toward the door, eager to leave, his entire body language screaming of barely controlled panic. I'll show you the villa layout, introduce you, explain the immediate procedures, and then I'm leaving. Today, right now, within the hour. I can't stay here another night. I can't look at him one more time. I can't count one more 30-second interval. I can't spend one more Sunday night listening to my mother's voice calling me from that basement room, begging me to let her out, telling me she's been trapped in the cold and dark for so long. I can't. His voice broke on the last word, and Matthias saw tears in the older priest's eyes, not just emotional tears, but the kind that come from complete exhaustion, from a nervous system pushed beyond its limits. The dreams have started, Ignatius continued, wiping at his face with trembling hands. That's how you know you're running out of time, when you start seeing that place in your sleep, the grey place, the cold place where the dead linger, the place where he's really from, if from even means anything for something like him. I've been dreaming about it for 3 weeks now. Every night I go deeper. I walk through those impossible landscapes, those buildings that hurt to think about. And I'm not alone there. There are others, things that used to be human, things that exist in all their moments simultaneously, spread across every second of their lives, experiencing everything at once. Last night I met something there, something that spoke to me in my dead brother's voice. It knew my name, Father Corvain. It knew things about me that I'd forgotten. And it told me I was almost ready to stay there permanently, almost ready to stop being anchored to linear time and spread out across all my moments like they have. I woke up screaming. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and on my chest I found this. He pulled up his shirt. On his sternum, a mark, not quite a bruise, not quite a burn. It was shaped like a handprint, but the proportions were wrong. The fingers too long, the palm too narrow, the thumb placed where no human thumb should be. They're touching me now, Ignatius whispered, reaching across from that grey place into this one, marking me as theirs. I requested immediate transfer that morning. I'm done. I'm finished. Let someone else bear this burden. Let someone else watch the anchor that keeps the dead from flooding the living. They walked through the villa while Ignatius spoke in rapid, desperate bursts. He pointed out rooms with mechanical efficiency, as if he'd rehearsed this briefing countless times in his mind, perfecting it while knowing it would never be adequate. Kitchen here. Food is delivered every Monday and Thursday. The delivery people never come past the gate. They leave the supplies in a locked box, ring a bell, and leave immediately. They're paid very well, not to ask questions, not to linger, not to look too closely at the villa or wonder who lives here. Dining room here. You'll eat with him 3 times a day, always at the scheduled times. Always. Never early, never late, not even by 30 seconds. Library here. Thousands of volumes, some dating back centuries. Most of them are about him, about the monastery. about attempts to understand what he is and where he came from. Read them if you want. They won't help. They'll just give you more questions and fewer answers. The scholars who wrote these books all went mad eventually. Their final entries are all the same. Fragments of understanding that couldn't be contained in language. Attempts to describe things that have no words. Geometric proofs of impossible spaces. They climbed to the second floor. The staircase was wide and graceful, the banister carved with intricate designs of vines and flowers, except that when Matthias looked closely, some of the flowers had too many petals, too many stamens, arrangements that didn't follow any botanical pattern he recognized. Everything about the villa spoke of wealth and history and careful preservation. Nothing suggested the horror that lived within. It was camouflage, beauty as a mask for something that couldn't be looked at directly. Your quarters are here. Ignatius opened a door to reveal a comfortable room with a large bed, a desk, a wardrobe, and windows that looked out over the gardens. It's pleasant enough. Better accommodations than most priests enjoy. Almost makes you forget why you're really here. Almost. But you'll never really forget. Even when you sleep, you'll know he's in the building with you. You'll feel his presence like a weight on your consciousness. And at night, you'll hear him walking, pacing the hallways for hours, never stopping, never tiring, because he never sleeps, never needs rest, never experiences fatigue, because those are biological necessities. And he's not really biological, not really physical, in the way we are. He showed Matthias the bathroom, modern fixtures installed with care to maintain the villa's aesthetic. A guest room that was never used, its door kept locked, though Ignatius didn't explain why. A storage area filled with cleaning supplies and extra linens, everything organized with obsessive precision, as if maintaining order in small things could create an illusion of control in a situation that was fundamentally uncontrollable. Then they stopped at the end of the hallway before a closed door marked with a small brass plaque that read simply, Anselm. His room, Ignatius said unnecessarily. The door is never locked. He can leave whenever he wants, but he mostly stays inside during the day, sitting on his bed or at his desk, drawing those pictures or just staring at nothing or at everything. At all moments simultaneously, seeing past and future with equal clarity. At night, he shuddered. At night he walks, you'll hear him, pacing the hallways, up and down, back and forth, never stopping until dawn. Don't try to talk to him during these walks. Don't acknowledge them at all. Pretend you're asleep. Pretend you hear nothing. Because if you engage with him during those night walks, he'll show you things. Things you can't unsee. Things that will change how you perceive reality. Father Dominic spoke to him once during a night walk, asked him where he was going. Anselm smiled and said, "Nowhere, everywhere. I'm walking through all moments of this hallway's existence, simultaneously, experiencing it as it was built, as it is now, as it will be when the villa crumbles to dust centuries from now. All at once. Would you like to see?" Father Dominic said yes. We found him the next morning standing in the hallway, unresponsive, staring at the wall. He wouldn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, all he would say was, "Too many moments. All at once. I can't tell when now is. I'm experiencing everything simultaneously, and I can't collapse back into linear time." He never fully recovered. From within the room came no sound. But Matthias had the distinct impression that someone was listening to every word they said, had been listening since before they'd entered the villa, would always be listening because for him there was no before or after, just an eternal present that contained all moments. "Before we go in," Ignatius said, his voice dropping even lower, "you need to understand the rules. Cardinal Tessero mentioned them, I'm sure, but he can't really explain how important they are, because he's never served as a guardian, never lived with Anselm day after day, never felt what it's like to have your perception of reality slowly dismantled. The rules aren't suggestions, Father Corvain. They're not guidelines or best practices. They're the only thing standing between you and complete psychological dissolution. They're survival protocols written in the blood and madness of everyone who came before you. He opened the journal to a page near the front, marked with a red ribbon. His handwriting was cramped, urgent, written in what looked like several different pens over multiple sessions, as if he kept adding notes and clarifications as he learned more, as previous Guardian's experiences became his own. Rule 1. Never look at Anselm for more than 30 seconds at a time. Count in your head. Always count. This isn't about politeness or avoiding staring. It's about survival. When you look at him for too long, your brain starts to perceive what he really is beneath the child shape, and human neurology isn't built to process that information. You'll start to see layers, depths that shouldn't exist in a child's face, distances that can't be contained in a human body. Time will begin to slip. You'll lose minutes, hours, sometimes days. His voice dropped to a whisper. I once looked at him for 2 full minutes. I was tired. I forgot to count. I let my attention drift. And when I finally looked away, 3 days had passed. 3 days gone, and I have no memory of them whatsoever. But I found journal entries I'd written during that time. Entries I don't remember writing. I found meals I'd prepared and eaten. I found evidence that I'd carried out all my duties normally, had conversations with him, followed the schedule perfectly, but I remember none of it. It's like someone else was inhabiting my body, while my consciousness was elsewhere, perceiving things that can't be described in human language, walking through that grey place while my body continued functioning here. Matthias felt his mouth go dry. 3 days? Just from looking too long? 3 days that time. It's happened 4 times total. The longest gap was 5 days. I'm missing weeks of my life, Father Corvain. Weeks where I was apparently functioning normally, but I've absolutely no memory of existing. And I'm one of the lucky ones. Father Silvanus lost months. Father Dominic lost his entire final year. Couldn't remember anything from his last 12 months here. It's like those moments were edited out of his personal timeline, removed and replaced with nothing. He flipped to the next marked page. Rule 2. Anselm must eat 3 meals a day at exactly 8 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and 7 in the evening. Not a minute early or late. Use your watch, check it constantly. Set alarms if you need to. This isn't about nutrition. I don't think he needs food in any conventional sense. His body doesn't process it normally. But the routine anchors him, keeps him fixed in linear time, keeps him behaving like a child rather than whatever he actually is when he's not pretending for us. What happens if you're late? Time becomes unstable around him. I was late with lunch once, only 5 minutes. I'd fallen asleep accidentally while reading in the library. And when I brought the food to the table, Anselm just sat there staring at his plate. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't touch the food. And while he sat there, maybe 30 seconds, the food began to rot. Not slowly, like normal decay. Rapidly, as if weeks or months were passing in seconds. The bread moulded, turned green and black, crumbled to dust. The meat putrefied, turning grey and then black, crawling with maggots that appeared from nowhere and aged and died in seconds. The vegetables shriveled and blackened and dissolved into liquid. And my hands... He held them up, still trembling. My hands aged while I held the tray. The skin became spotted and thin, like an old man's. The veins standing out prominently, like blue ropes. Age spots appearing like instant bruises. The bones becoming visible through increasingly transparent skin. I was 40 years old, but my hands looked 90. Looked ancient. Looked like hands that should be in a coffin. The effect faded by morning, thank God. By the time I woke up, my hands looked normal again, but the message was clear. The feeding schedule maintains temporal stability. Break it, and time itself becomes negotiable around him. And if time is negotiable for the food, it's negotiable for you too. Matthias looked at his own hands, still young, still strong. He wondered how they'd look in a few weeks, a few months, if he'd even live long enough to find out. Rule 3, Ignatius continued, his voice growing more strained. Anselm will sometimes speak in languages you don't understand. Ancient languages, dead languages, languages that might never have been human. Never ask him to translate. Never ask him what he's saying. Pretend you didn't hear it at all. This is crucial. I broke this rule once, early on. I was curious. My academic training, you understand, my years of studying ancient texts, my pride in my linguistic abilities. I wanted to know what language he was speaking. So I asked him, and he told me. Ignatius's hands shook worse as he remembered. It wasn't any language from Earth, Father Corvain. It wasn't something with grammar and syntax and vocabulary. It was concepts, pure meaning without words, ideas transmitted directly from consciousness to consciousness without the intermediary of language. He translated one sentence for me, and it took him 10 minutes to approximate it in human speech, to find metaphors and analogies that could convey even a fraction of the meaning. And when I understood what he'd said, he closed his eyes. I couldn't eat for a week. I couldn't sleep without nightmares because he'd described a place, a realm, somewhere that exists outside our universe's physical laws. A place where consciousness persists without bodies, where time moves in multiple directions simultaneously, forward, backward, sideways through dimensions we can't perceive, where distances are measured in emotions rather than miles, where thought itself is matter and memory is geography. And he told me that's where he's from. That's what he is, a consciousness from that place, temporarily squeezed into the shape of a human child, contained by rules and rituals and sheer force of will. The words he speaks in those unknown languages, they're him talking to others of his kind, others who exist in that place. And they're always trying to call him back, trying to pull him out of our reality and into theirs. Why would they want him back? Because he's different. He's learned to focus, to maintain a singular form, to experience linear time. The others can't do that. They're trapped in eternal superposition, experiencing all moments simultaneously, unable to collapse into sequence. They envy him, or they need him, or perhaps they just want to reclaim what they see as theirs. I don't know. The concepts don't translate well, but I know they're always watching, always waiting, always hoping he'll drift far enough that they can pull him back. And we guardians, we're what keeps him anchored. We're the weight that keeps him from floating away. Rule 4. He will ask you questions about yourself, your family, your past, your fears, your desires, your regrets. Answer only yes or no, never elaborate. Never provide details. Never tell stories or share memories. Ignatius's voice became urgent. This seems simple, but it's insidious. He has a way of making you want to talk. His questions seem innocent, friendly even, genuinely curious. But he's not being friendly. He's extracting information, building a psychological profile, learning your weaknesses, your attachments, your vulnerabilities. And he'll use that information later. He'll use it to show you things in your dreams, to call to you in the voices of people you've lost, to manifest your deepest fears and greatest hopes in ways that will destroy you. He turned to the next page, his finger tracing over words that had been underlined multiple times. I violated this rule repeatedly in my first month. I thought I was building rapport, establishing trust. I told him about my childhood, my family, my brother who died when we were young, my mother's struggle with cancer, My father's distant nature. He listened with those empty eyes, nodding at appropriate moments, seeming to care. But he was just collecting ammunition. Now, every Sunday night when he's locked in the basement, I hear all of them. My brother calling my name, my mother begging for help, my father apologizing for being cold. All of them trapped in that grey place, all of them suffering, all of them needing me. And it's my fault. I gave Anselm the information he needed to weaponize my grief against me. Rule 5. Ignatius's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Once a week, on Sunday at midnight, Anselm must be locked in the basement room. You will hear sounds, voices, screaming sometimes. Things that sound like bodies moving through the villa. Do not investigate. Do not open the door until 6 Monday morning, no matter what you hear, no matter whose voice calls to you, no matter how convincing they sound. This is the most important rule, Father Corvain. This is the one that will test your faith and sanity more than all the others combined. What happens in that room? I don't know, not entirely, but I think that's when he's closest to his true nature, when the human mask slips completely, when he connects fully with that other place, that grey realm where consciousness exists without form, and when he does, things bleed through. The boundary between here and there becomes permeable. The voices you'll hear aren't random recordings or illusions. They're real consciousnesses from that place, using Anselm as a conduit to speak to you. The dead, perhaps, everyone who has ever died, existing in that superposition of all moments. They'll call your name. They'll beg you to open the door. They'll tell you things only they would know. Secret names, private memories, intimate details that no one else could possibly know. Ignatius's face was pale, his eyes haunted. I heard my mother once. She died of cancer when I was 16, but I heard her voice clear as day, calling me Nati, the pet name she used when I was a child. A name I'd never told anyone. A name that died with her. She was begging me to let her out of the dark, saying she'd been trapped for so long, saying she was cold and alone and frightened, saying I'd promised to take care of her and I failed. I stood outside that door for hours, my hand on the first lock, sobbing, wanting so desperately to believe she was really there, wanting so desperately to open the door and pull her back into this world. But I didn't open it. I held firm, because I knew that whatever was speaking in her voice wasn't really her. It was something using her memory against me, something that had access to my past, because I'd violated Rule 4 and told Anselm about her. Did you ever find out what would happen if you opened the door during those hours? No, but Father Dominic did. The previous guardian. He opened it at 3 a.m. during his first week. He thought someone was actually in distress. Thought he was saving a life. He lasted only 2 more weeks after that. When they found him in his apartment 2 months later, he'd aged 30 years overnight. His hair had gone completely white. His teeth had fallen out. His skin was covered in lesions that looked like advanced radiation burns. And he kept saying the same thing over and over. They wanted to come through. They were using him as a doorway. All of them. All the consciousnesses trapped in that grey place. Billions of them. All pressing against reality from the other side. If I'd left the door open longer, they would have flooded through. All of them at once. And our reality couldn't contain them. It would have torn like wet paper. Everything would have ended. He died 3 days later. The official report said stroke, but Ignatius shook his head. It wasn't a stroke. It was something else, something that consumed him from the inside out, as if he'd been partially pulled into that grey place and couldn't fully return. He turned to Rule 6. If Anselm draws pictures, burn them immediately in the courtyard fireplace. Do not look at them for more than a moment. Do not try to understand what they depict. Do not study them or analyze them or attempt to map the geography they show. He draws obsessively sometimes, pages and pages of illustrations, and they're not abstract. They're detailed, realistic, architectural. They show places, real places, I think, though they violate every law of geometry and physics we understand. Buildings that extend in directions that shouldn't exist, not up or down or left or right, but in other directions entirely, directions we don't have names for, because we can't perceive them. Landscapes with too many horizons, where the sky meets the ground at angles that shouldn't be possible. Skies that contain more than 3 dimensions, that seem to have depth and layers that fold in on themselves. Where is he drawing? That grey place, that realm outside our universe. His home, if something like him can be said to have a home. Looking at the drawings too long causes severe dissociation. Your mind tries to process the geometry, tries to make sense of the architecture, and it just breaks. You start to see those places in your peripheral vision, overlaid on normal reality, in reflections, in shadows, in the spaces between things. They begin to bleed through into your perception, and you can't tell what's real anymore. Father Callisto, he studied one of the drawings for several minutes, trying to analyze it scientifically, trying to understand the principles behind the impossible architecture. He subsequently tried to walk through a solid stone wall, convinced it was a doorway. He broke his nose and 3 fingers before we could restrain him. He kept saying he could see the corridor beyond the wall, could see it clear as day, couldn't understand why his body wouldn't pass through. He could see both realities simultaneously, ours and that grey place, and couldn't distinguish between them anymore. He requested transfer the next day. Rule 7. Anselm will sometimes appear in places he shouldn't be able to reach. Locked rooms, the roof, sealed areas of the villa. Act as if this is normal. Never express surprise or fear in his presence. Never acknowledge that what you're seeing is impossible. Ignatius's voice became more urgent. He doesn't obey physical laws the way we do. Walls, doors, distance, they mean nothing to him. He exists in multiple locations simultaneously, and sometimes you'll perceive that. You'll check on him in his room, see him sitting on his bed, then go downstairs and find him already in the kitchen preparing tea. You'll lock a door and find him on the other side. Once I found him inside a locked cabinet in the library, not hiding in it, inside it, occupying the same space as the books and shelves, his body somehow existing in multiple locations at once, both solid and translucent, both present and absent, a quantum superposition of existence. If you react with shock or fear, it marks you as aware of the wrongness, and that awareness has consequences. The wrongness spreads. Once he knows you can perceive his violations of natural law, he'll do it more. He'll test you. He'll appear in your room at night. He'll manifest in mirrors when you look at reflections. He'll be standing behind you when you turn around, even though he wasn't there a second before. It's like he's seeing how much reality breaking you can tolerate before you snap. And when you do snap, when you finally scream or run or show genuine terror, that's when he shows you what he really is. That's when the full revelation comes, and no one survives that intact. Rule 8. Ignatius's voice became almost inaudible. Anselm does not sleep. He will sit in his room at night with his eyes open, staring. Do not enter his room after 10 at night. Whatever you think you see through the gap in the door, you are mistaken. Tell yourself you are mistaken. Believe you are mistaken. Because if you acknowledge what you're seeing, if you admit even to yourself that what you're perceiving is real, then it becomes real. And that's worse than any nightmare. What do you see? Ignatius was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow, emptied of all emotion, as if he'd trained himself not to feel anything when discussing this particular horror. Shadows on the walls, but the shadows move independently of any light source. They form images, not random, but specific, detailed, impossible. Historical events from times and places you've never been. The future, things that haven't happened yet but will, with perfect accuracy. And that grey place, always that grey place. The shadows show it in 3 dimensions somehow, give you depth perception into flatness, let you see into those impossible distances. And there are things moving through it, entities, consciousnesses that used to be human but aren't anymore. Things shaped wrong because they exist in more dimensions than we can perceive, so we only see slices of them, cross-sections that make no sense. He opened the journal to a page covered in frantic handwriting, some words underlined multiple times, some crossed out and rewritten. I made the mistake of watching those shadows for too long one night. I stood in the hallway looking through the crack in his door, watching the shadows play across the walls for I don't know how long. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Time felt strange. And the things I saw. He touched the page with a shaking finger. I saw the excavation in Slovakia, the moment they opened the chamber and found him. But the shadows showed more than what the archaeologists saw. They showed what happened before, centuries before. The monks sealing him in 1347, their faces twisted with terror and determination. And before that, him in medieval villages, Renaissance cities, ancient Rome, places that existed before writing, always the same age, always watching, always unchanged. And I understood Father Corvain. I understood that he's not trapped here. We're trapped with him. The villa isn't his prison, it's ours. We're the ones being contained, forced to interact with something that should never have been perceived by human minds, sacrificing our sanity to keep him anchored because the alternative is so much worse. Ignatius closed the journal abruptly, as if he couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Those are the main rules. There are others, smaller ones, detailed in the journal, but those 8 are the foundation. Follow them absolutely, count every second, maintain the schedule with perfect precision, and you might last 6 months, a year if you're exceptionally strong and exceptionally lucky. Break them. He gestured vaguely. Break them, and you'll be gone in weeks. Your mind will fragment. Your sense of self will dissolve. Your perception of reality will become so corrupted that you won't be able to tell what's real anymore. And then you'll either die or become something else. Something that exists partially in this world and partially in that grey place. A bridge, a doorway. And that's when they'll come for you. They, the things that live there, the consciousnesses trapped in that superposition of all moments. Things like Anselm, but less focused, less controlled, less contained by the shape of childhood. They're always watching through him, always waiting for someone in our world to become permeable enough to serve as a gateway. And guardians, we all eventually become permeable. We all eventually see too much, understand too much, perceive too much. It's inevitable. The only variable is how long it takes. Matthias gripped the journal tighter, feeling the weight of centuries of suffering compressed into its pages. Then, why do you keep doing this? Why does the church keep sending guardians here to be destroyed? Because the alternative is worse. If Anselm has no guardian, if he's left completely alone, he'll drift. He'll lose his connection to humanity, lose his grip on this form, this shape, this pretense of being a child. And when that happens, when he reverts to whatever he actually is, Ignatius's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. Reality itself begins to break down. The fabric of our universe starts to thin where he exists. And those things from the grey place, they'll be able to cross over. Not just one or two. All of them. Everything that exists in that realm of eternal superposition will flood into linear time. Billions of consciousnesses, all trying to collapse into singular existence, all fighting for space in a reality that can't contain them. It'll be an invasion, Father Corvain, an incursion of entities that our physics can't support, that our minds can't comprehend, that our very existence can't accommodate. Guardians aren't here to protect Anselm. We're here to protect reality itself by keeping him anchored, keeping him focused, keeping him pretending to be human just a little bit longer. The door to Anselm's room opened. Neither of them had touched it. Neither had knocked, but it swung open slowly, smoothly, as if moved by invisible hands, or by something that didn't need hands, that could manipulate matter through pure intention. The room beyond was surprisingly ordinary at first glance. A bed with a simple wooden frame and white linens, precisely made with hospital corners. A desk with paper and pencils neatly arranged in geometric patterns. A bookshelf filled with volumes, children's books, classics, religious texts, scientific treatises, philosophy, history. A window that looked out over the gardens, afternoon sunlight streaming through clean glass. Everything clean, organized, normal, except for the boy sitting on the bed. Anselm was exactly as he'd appeared in the photograph, pale skin that seemed almost luminous in the sunlight, dark hair neatly combed, grey clothing that looked both new and ancient. 8 years old in appearance, small and fragile looking. Except he wasn't fragile. He was the opposite. Something so solid, so permanent, so unchangeable, that the rest of reality seemed fragile by comparison. But seeing him in person was different from seeing the photograph. There was something about him that made Matthias's eyes want to slide away, as if his brain was trying to protect itself from perceiving too much. The boy was simultaneously perfectly visible and somehow difficult to look at, like trying to stare directly at an optical illusion. "Hello, Father Matthias," the boy said in a flat, emotionless voice that sounded like speech, produced by something that had studied human communication, but never truly experienced it. Words formed by something that understood language as mathematics rather than meaning. "Father Ignatius told me you were coming. I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting a very long time. Though time and waiting don't mean the same thing to me as they do to you." Matthias started counting immediately, though he hadn't consciously decided to do so. 1, 2, 3. The boy's eyes were wrong, not in colour, which was a normal brown, or in shape, which was human enough, but in depth. They seemed to extend further back than they should, as if Matthias were looking not at eyes but through windows into vast, impossible distances, like looking into a tunnel that had no end, that went on forever, that contained centuries or millennia of existence compressed into the space where eyeballs should be. 15, 16, 17. He could see things in those depths if he looked too long. Movement, shadows, other places superimposed over this room. Time felt strange, like it was flowing at multiple speeds simultaneously. 23, 24, 25. "You're counting," Anselm observed, with something that might have been approval. "Good, you've been briefed properly. Father Ignatius is very thorough. I'll miss him. He lasted longer than most. He tried so hard to follow the rules, to maintain the protocols, to keep himself intact. But they all fail eventually. They all break. They all see what they shouldn't see and understand what they shouldn't understand. And then they leave, or die, or become something between human and what I am. Something that exists in both places at once." 28, 29, 30. Matthias looked away, focusing on the wall behind Anselm's head. His heart was racing, his palms sweating. That brief eye contact had felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss that looked back with ancient, patient, inhuman intelligence that had been waiting for him specifically, that knew exactly who he was and what would happen to him here. I'll leave you two to become acquainted, Ignatius said quickly, backing toward the door like a man retreating from a predator. Father Corvain, the feeding schedule is posted in the kitchen. Breakfast is in 1 hour, 8 o'clock exactly. Don't be late. Don't be early. Exact time. His voice cracked. I'll say goodbye now. I won't see you again before I leave. I can't be here anymore. I can't look at him one more time. I can't count one more 30-second interval. I can't pretend one more day that this is normal, that this is manageable, that I haven't been irrevocably changed by living with something that should not exist. Wait, Matthias said, turning toward him, panic rising. You're leaving right now? This moment? My replacement is here. My duty is fulfilled. Every minute I stay is a minute closer to... Ignatius shook his head violently. I'm done. I'm finished. 3 weeks ago I started seeing them while awake. The things from that place. In mirrors. In shadows. Standing at the edge of my vision. They're not just in my dreams anymore. They're here, in the waking world, waiting for me to cross over completely. And I won't let them have me. I'm leaving now, while I still can, while I still remember who I am, while I can still tell the difference between Father Ignatius, the priest, and whatever I'm becoming. He turned and fled, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, rapid and panicked. Then on the stairs, then the sound of the front door opening and closing, with desperate finality. An engine starting, tires on gravel, the sound receding quickly as if the driver was accelerating away from danger. Then silence. Matthias stood in the hallway alone with the boy in the room, feeling more isolated than he'd ever felt in his life. Cut off from everything familiar, from everyone he knew, trapped in this beautiful villa, with something that wore a child's shape but was infinitely old and utterly alien. He lasted longer than most, Anselm said conversationally, as if discussing weather or sports rather than a man's psychological destruction. 2 years is impressive. Most guardians break at the 6-month mark. The strong ones last longer, but they suffer more because they fight it instead of accepting it. I wonder how long you'll last, Father Matthias. You seem strong, disciplined. Military background, I understand. That might help. Or it might make it worse. Soldiers are trained to face threats directly. But I'm not the kind of threat you can face. I'm the kind you have to ignore while I slowly dismantle your understanding of reality. What are you? Matthias asked before he could stop himself. Anselm smiled, a slight curve of lips that didn't reach his eyes and contained no warmth, no humanity, no emotion at all. Just the mechanical mimicry of what a smile should look like, performed by something that understood, smiling as a social signal but had never felt happiness. That's not a yes or no question, Father Matthias. You're already breaking Rule 4, but I'll allow it this once because you're new and curious and you haven't yet learned that curiosity about me is dangerous. What am I? I'm old. Older than your church, older than Christianity, older than monotheism, older than the concept of gods themselves. I existed before humans learned to speak, before they learned to fear the dark, before they developed the cognitive capacity to ask, what am I? I'm what I've always been, the child who doesn't age, the keeper of doors, the anchor that keeps the dead from flooding the living, the thing that exists in all moments simultaneously, but has learned to focus itself into this singular shape so that beings like you can interact with me without going immediately insane. He stood up from the bed with unnatural grace, his movements too smooth, too precise, lacking any trace of childish awkwardness. But we can discuss philosophy later. Right now you should prepare my dinner. It's 6:53. You have 7 minutes. The kitchen is downstairs, second door on the left. Everything you need is in the refrigerator and pantry. The schedule is posted on the wall. I'll meet you in the dining room at 7 o'clock exactly. Not a minute early. Not a second late. Time matters here, Father Matthias. It's the only thing that matters. It's what keeps me anchored. and keeps you alive. Matthias fled, moving quickly down the stairs, desperate to put distance between himself and those eyes that had seen the birth of civilizations and their deaths, those eyes that would see the end of everything and remain unchanged. He found the kitchen, large, professional grade, stocked with fresh produce and staples. A schedule was posted on the wall with precise instructions in Ignatius's cramped handwriting. Dinner, 7 p.m, chicken breast grilled, no seasoning, steamed vegetables, broccoli, carrots, plain rice water, 1 apple cut into 8 equal slices. Matthias checked his watch, 6:55. He cooked frantically, his hands shaking as he prepared the meal. Everything had to be ready at exactly 7. Not a minute early or late. He could hear Ignatius's warning echoing in his mind. Time becomes unstable around him. At 6:59 and 45 seconds, he carried the plate to the dining room. Anselm was already there, sitting at the table, hands folded, waiting. He had been there the entire time, Matthias realized. Or he had just appeared. Or time had folded, and he'd been there for hours or seconds or both simultaneously. Matthias set the plate down at exactly 7 o'clock according to his watch, according to the atomic clock on his phone, according to every measure of time he could verify. "Thank you, Father Matthias," Anselm said in that flat, emotionless voice. He picked up his fork and began to eat. And Matthias watched, trying not to stare for too long, trying to count the seconds, as the boy consumed his dinner with mechanical precision. Each bite exactly the same size, cut with mathematical accuracy. Exactly 12 chews per bite, no more, no less, the rhythm never varying. A sip of water between every 3 bites, the glass returning to the exact same position on the table each time. The apple slices eaten in clockwise order around the plate, each piece disappearing with identical timing. It was like watching a machine pretend to be human, or something ancient and alien, trying to remember how children ate, executing a learned behavior without truly understanding its purpose, performing humanity without experiencing it. "Did you have a family, Father Matthias?" Anselm asked suddenly, still chewing his food with that precise rhythm. Rule 4, yes or no only, never elaborate. "Yes." "Do you miss them?" "Yes." Anselm's smile widened slightly, and something flickered in his eyes. Interest, perhaps, or calculation, or hunger for information. "I understand missing things. I've missed many things over the years. So many things, I can barely remember them all. Time does that. It accumulates when you experience all of it simultaneously. Layer upon layer of memory, pressing down, compressing, until the oldest ones are so dense and heavy, they pull at you constantly, like gravity pulling on matter." Matthias didn't respond. Couldn't respond without violating the rules. But he wanted to ask, "How old are you really? Where are you really from? What are you? What happens to the guardians who see too much?" "You have questions," Anselm observed, taking another bite. 12 chews. Swallow. "Everyone does." Father Ignatius had questions too, at first. So many questions. He stopped asking eventually. By the end, he didn't want answers anymore. He just wanted to survive each day without losing more of himself. Just wanted to make it to the next scheduled mealtime, the next safe moment, the next routine that kept him anchored to sanity, while everything he believed about reality slowly dissolved. You'll reach that point too. They all do. The questions fade. The curiosity dies. All that remains is the desperate hope that you can maintain yourself long enough to request transfer before you spread too thin and become one of them. The meal continued in silence after that. Matthias watched peripherally, counting seconds in his head whenever his eyes drifted toward the boy's face. 1, 2, 3, never more than 30. Always looking away before the count reached its limit, before he saw too much, before his perception started to change. When Anselm finished, the plate completely clean, not a crumb remaining, as if it had been washed already, he stood with that same unnatural grace. "Thank you for dinner, Father Matthias. It was prepared correctly, at exactly the right time, which is good. Maintaining the schedule is important. It keeps me focused here, in this moment, in this form. Without it, I drift. And when I drift, things change. Reality becomes negotiable. The laws that govern your existence become optional. I'll be in my room until tomorrow morning. Please don't disturb me after 10 o'clock at night. You might see things through the gap in the door that trouble you. Remember, whatever you think you're seeing, you're mistaken. Tell yourself that, believe it. It's the only way to survive the nights here." He walked away, his footsteps making no sound on the hardwood floor. Matthias cleared the dishes with shaking hands, noticing that the plate was completely clean, not just empty, but spotless, as if it had never held food at all. No grease from the chicken, no residue from the rice, nothing, as if the food had simply ceased to exist rather than being consumed. He retreated to his room and opened Ignatius's journal, reading through the entries in chronological order, watching the previous guardian's psychological decline documented in increasingly frantic handwriting. The early entries were hopeful, professional, observational. The later ones were desperate fragments of someone trying to hold on to sanity while it slipped through his fingers like water. That night, Matthias lay in his bed, trying to sleep. The villa was silent, too silent, no creaks of settling wood, no distant sounds of wildlife, no ambient noise at all, just oppressive quiet that made his heartbeat sound thunderous in his ears. At 11:30 the footsteps began. Slow, measured, pacing back and forth in the hallway outside his room. Back and forth, never stopping, never varying in rhythm. The sound was soft but distinct. Footfalls that shouldn't exist because Anselm's feet made no sound during the day. Matthias lay frozen, listening. The footsteps passed his door. Returned. Passed again. Always the same rhythm, the same pace, mechanical in their consistency, eternal in their repetition. He wanted to get up, to look, to confirm it was just Anselm walking the halls, but Ignatius's warning echoed in his memory. Don't acknowledge them. Pretend you're asleep. Pretend you hear nothing. So Matthias lay still, eyes open in the darkness, listening to those impossible footsteps, pace until dawn light crept through his window and the sounds finally, mercifully ceased. And so began his first full day in the villa with the thing that called itself Anselm. The days blurred together quickly, each one identical to the last, governed by the rigid schedule that kept both guardian and ward anchored to linear time. Wake at 7, breakfast at 8, lunch at 1, dinner at 7. Count the seconds when looking at him, answer only yes or no. Burn the drawings, maintain the routine. But despite the rigid structure, wrongness accumulated like sediment. On the second day, Matthias noticed Anselm never blinked. Not during meals, not during their brief exchanges, never. The boy's eyes remained open and fixed, staring with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see through walls and time itself. On the third day, he caught sight of Anselm's reflection in a hallway mirror. The boy passed by, but his reflection followed a heartbeat later, slightly out of sync, like an echo made visible. When Matthias looked again, the reflection matched perfectly. But he'd seen the lag, the delay, the evidence that Anselm's image and Anselm himself existed in slightly different temporal streams. On the fourth day, Matthias found Anselm sitting on the villa's roof when he went outside to tend the gardens. He looked up at the terracotta tiles, and there the boy was, perched on the ridge with impossible balance, staring down at him with those empty eyes. There was no way to reach the roof, no ladder, no exterior stairs, no access point at all. Yet there he sat, waving slowly with that empty smile. When Matthias went inside and climbed to the second floor, Anselm was in his room sitting on his bed, as if he'd been there all along. Rule 7. Act as if it's normal. Show no surprise. Matthias said nothing, continued with his day, ignored the impossibility, but his hands shook for hours afterward. On the 5th day, Anselm began asking more pointed questions. Did you have a brother, Father Matthias? Yes. Rule 4. Yes or no only. Did you love him? Yes. Is he dead? Yes. Anselm tilted his head, and Matthias saw something shift in his expression, the first genuine reaction he'd shown. What was his name? That wasn't a yes or no question. Matthias opened his mouth to refuse, to redirect, but his brother's name came out anyway, pulled from him like a confession he couldn't suppress. Luca. He regretted it immediately, saw Anselm's expression shift minutely, a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction or calculation or hunger. Luca, the boy repeated, as if tasting the name, rolling it around in his mouth, memorizing its shape and sound and emotional resonance. That's a good name. Strong, beautiful. Italian, yes? You must miss him terribly. The dead leave such holes in us, don't they? Spaces shaped like the people we've lost, and those spaces never really fill. They just ache forever. That night, for the first time in years, Matthias dreamed vividly of his brother. Luca, at 19, the age he'd died, laughing and alive and whole. The dream was so real that when Matthias woke, he expected to find Luca in the next room, expected to smell coffee brewing, and hear his brother's voice calling him to breakfast. The disappointment of reality hit him like a physical blow. Anselm had done that, had reached into his mind using just a name and pulled Luca's memory to the surface with surgical precision, and this was only the beginning. The first Sunday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Matthias dreaded it all day. He could barely eat breakfast, could barely focus on anything except the approaching midnight hour. At 11:30 p.m, he went to Anselm's room. The boy was standing by the door as if he'd been waiting there for hours, had known the exact moment Matthias would arrive. It's time, Matthias said, his voice hoarse. Yes. Anselm walked ahead of him down the stairs, down further to the basement level that Matthias hadn't fully explored yet. The air grew colder as they descended, and the quality of light changed. The electric bulbs seemed dimmer here, struggling against oppressive darkness. At the end of a stone corridor stood a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. 3 separate locks ran down its length, each requiring a different key. The keys hung on a hook beside the door, each labelled top, middle, bottom. The floor around the door was covered in symbols carved deep into the stone, circles and lines and characters from alphabets Matthias didn't recognize, didn't want to recognize. This is the good part, Anselm said softly, his voice carrying none of its usual flatness. For the first time he sounded almost eager, almost human in his anticipation. You don't have to be afraid, Father Matthias. What happens in here is necessary, natural. It's what I am when I'm not pretending to be what you need me to be, when I'm not maintaining the shape of childhood to keep your mind from breaking. I don't understand. You will. Everyone does eventually. Anselm stepped into the room. It was bare except for a wooden chair bolted to the floor and a small table. No windows. Stone walls at least a foot thick. The floor was covered in more symbols, more elaborate than those outside, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Close the door now, Anselm said, sitting in the chair with that unnatural precision. Lock it, all 3 locks, and remember, no matter what you hear, no matter whose voice calls to you, don't open it until 6 o'clock Monday morning. Promise me, Father Matthias, promise me you won't open it. The way he said it, promise me, as if he were begging for protection rather than warning of danger, as if he feared what might happen if the door opened prematurely, sent ice through Matthias's veins. I promise. Good. Because if you open this door before 6 a.m, if you let them through before they're ready, before I can filter them properly. Anselm's voice dropped to a whisper. Everything ends, not just you. Not just this villa, not just Italy or Earth. Everything. Reality itself unravels. The barrier breaks completely. And they flood through. All of them at once. Every consciousness trapped in that grey place. Every entity that exists in those spaces between moments. Billions of them. Trillions maybe. All the dead from all of time. All trying to collapse into singular existence simultaneously. Your world isn't structured to contain them. It'll shatter like glass. So promise me, no matter what you hear, no matter how convincing the voices are, no matter how much you want to believe, don't open this door. Matthias felt his mouth go dry. This was more emotion than Anselm had ever shown. More urgency, more fear. Whatever happened in that room during those 6 hours, it terrified even this ancient thing that claimed to feel nothing. I promise, Matthias repeated. He closed the door. The sound of wood meeting stone echoed like a coffin lid closing. He turned the first key. The top lock clicked into place with a heavy, final thunk that resonated through the corridor. The second key, the middle lock, sliding home with a metallic scrape that sounded like claws on stone. The third key, the bottom lock, falling into place with a sound like a prison cell sealing shut forever. Matthias checked his watch, 11:59 and 50 seconds. As he watched, the second hand swept toward 12. Midnight. For exactly 17 seconds there was absolute silence. The kind of silence that doesn't exist in nature, that feels like the absence of sound but also the absence of possibility for sound, as if the very air had forgotten how to carry vibrations. Then the sounds began. At first, just scratching, fingernails on stone or something harder, something that scored the rock with each pass. The sound came from inside the room, from all around it, from beneath it maybe, as if the foundations themselves were being clawed at. Then whispers, too low to make out words, but carrying the rhythm and cadence of human speech. Multiple voices overlapping, creating a susurrus like wind through dead leaves or waves on a distant shore. Except this wasn't natural sound. It was voices, countless voices, all trying to speak at once. Matthias turned to leave, to climb back to his room, to hide from whatever was happening down here. But the whispers grew louder, and he began to hear words. Father. Father Matthias, help us. He froze, his hand on the stair railing. Every muscle in his body tensed. Please, we're trapped. It's so dark here, so cold. The voices multiplied. Dozens of them now, hundreds maybe. Men, women, children, old voices and young, all whispering, pleading, begging. And beneath them all, a deeper sound. A vibration that wasn't quite sound that he felt in his bones rather than heard with his ears. A frequency that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. Matthias forced himself to climb the stairs. He made it to the ground floor, then to his room where he shut the door and locked it, as if that would help, as if wood and metal could keep out whatever was happening in the basement. It didn't. The sounds followed him. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, travelling through the villa's structure like infection through veins. He pressed his hands over his ears, but it made no difference. The voices were inside his head now, internal and impossible to block, resonating directly in his consciousness without needing ears or air or any physical medium. At 12:17 a.m, he heard his brother's voice. Matty! Matty, where are you? Matthias's breath caught. That nickname, that tone, that was Luca's voice exactly as he remembered it. Young, frightened. The voice of a 19-year-old boy facing something terrible. Matty, I'm scared. Please help me. It's dark here. I can't see. I need you. The voice was perfect. Not a memory or an approximation or an actor's imitation, but actually Luca's voice, with every subtle inflection, every unique quality that had made it his brother's and no one else's. I've been calling for you for so long, 16 years, Matty. 16 years in the dark. Why won't you answer? Why won't you help me? Matthias found himself standing, his body moving toward the door without his conscious permission. His hand reached for the doorknob, his grief pulling him forward like gravity, like destiny, like the inevitability of answering when your dead brother calls your name. Matty, please, just open the door. Just let me out. I'm trapped down there with him, with that thing, with all the others. We're all trapped in the grey place. Just open the door, and I can come back. I can be alive again. We can be brothers again. You promised you'd always protect me. You promised. He had promised. The night before the accident, they'd argued. Some stupid fraternal disagreement about nothing that mattered, about borrowed money or a forgotten favour or something equally meaningless. And Matthias had apologised. Had said he'd always be there for his little brother, would always protect him, would never let anything bad happen. And then, the next day, the phone call from the hospital. Luca's car wrapped around a tree, dead before the ambulance arrived. And Matthias hadn't been there, hadn't protected him, had broken his promise in the most final, irreversible way possible. Come let me out, Matty. I'm in the dark. I'm so cold. Just open the door. Just this once, please. I'm your brother. Don't you love me anymore? Matthias made it to the hallway. His hand was on the stair railing. His feet began carrying him down toward the basement, down toward that locked door, down toward the voice of his dead brother calling from impossible darkness. That's right, come closer. Come help me. It's so cold here, Matty, so dark. I've missed you. Don't you want to see me again? Don't you want to tell me you're sorry? Don't you want one more chance to be a good brother? He was halfway down the first flight of stairs when other voices joined Luca's. His mother, dead of cancer 5 years ago. Matthias, darling, is that you? I've been waiting so long. The cancer, it doesn't hurt anymore. But I'm trapped. I can't move forward or backward. I'm stuck in the grey. Please help your mother. Don't leave me here alone. His father, dead for decades. Son, I know we weren't close before I died. I know I was distant, cold, didn't show you the love you needed. But death changes you, makes you see what really mattered. And family matters, son. Family is all that matters. We're your family. We're calling to you. Won't you answer? More voices. His grandmother. His confirmation teacher who died of a heart attack. His best friend from high school killed in Afghanistan. A litany of the dead, all calling his name, all begging for release from whatever cold place they inhabited, all promising that opening the door would bring them back, would heal the grief, would make everything right again. Matthias stood frozen on the stairs, tears streaming down his face, his entire body shaking. Every instinct screamed at him to run down to that basement door, to turn those keys, to throw it open and pull his loved ones out of whatever nightmare they were trapped in. But Ignatius's words burned in his memory like a brand. Do not listen. Do not believe. Do not open the door. They're not real. They're echoes. Memories given voice by entities that have learned to manipulate human emotion. And Anselm's warning, just hours ago, if you open this door before 6 a.m, everything ends. Reality itself unravels. Matthias turned and ran. He fled back up the stairs, back to his room, slamming the door and locking it as if locks meant anything against what was happening. He grabbed his Bible and rosary, pressing them against his chest like talismans, praying in a desperate whisper while his brother's voice called to him through the walls. Matty, please don't leave me. Don't abandon me again. I'm your brother. I'm scared. Matty. The voice changed, became accusatory, angry, twisted with betrayal. "You let me die, Matty. You could have saved me, but you didn't. You weren't there when I needed you, and now you won't even open a door? What kind of brother are you? What kind of priest? You're supposed to help souls in need, but you leave me trapped in the dark." Other voices joined, building a chorus of accusation and grief. "Selfish son, leaving your mother to suffer. Coward, abandoning your friends. Faithless priest, ignoring the cries of the dead. You promised to protect me and you failed." The voices weren't just in his head anymore. They seemed to manifest physically in the room. Matthias kept his eyes squeezed shut, terrified of what he might see if he looked, of what his mind might conjure or what might actually be there, reaching across from that grey place into his reality. He prayed frantically, cycling through every prayer he'd memorized in seminary. Hail Marys and Our Fathers and the Apostles' Creed, and fragments of Latin liturgy, all tumbling from his lips in a continuous stream of desperate faith. The words felt hollow, meaningless, like shouting into a void. But he kept praying because it was all he had, the only weapon against this assault on his grief and guilt and love. Hours passed. The voices never stopped, never lessened. They cycled through his loved ones, then moved to strangers, people he'd met briefly, people who died in his presence during his time as a military chaplain, soldiers he'd given last rites to on blood-soaked battlefields. "You couldn't save us either, Father. You watched us die, you blessed our bodies and sent us to this place, this grey place between heaven and hell. And now we're trapped. Now we suffer eternally. Because of you." At 3 a.m, the voices stopped trying to persuade him. They just screamed. Endless, agonized screaming that sounded like all the torments of hell compressed into sound. Matthias curled into a ball on his bed, hands pressed over his ears, Bible clutched to his chest, sobbing and praying and begging for it to stop. At 4 a.m, the quality of the screaming changed. It became less human, more animal, more alien. Sounds that human throats couldn't produce. Frequencies too high and too low. Harmonics that shouldn't exist. Syllables from languages that predated speech itself. Words that hurt to hear because they carried meanings that human minds weren't structured to process. At 5 a.m, silence fell. The absence of sound was somehow worse than the cacophony had been. It was a silence that pressed down like physical weight, smothering and complete. Matthias lay frozen, not daring to move, his ears ringing from the sudden quiet. At 5:47 a.m, exactly 13 minutes before the ordained time, he heard new sounds. Not voices, footsteps, heavy footsteps, multiple sets, in the hallway outside his room, but not Anselm's silent tread. These were different, dragging, shambling, accompanied by wet, sliding sounds like something being pulled across the floor. Like bodies moving through the villa, like things that had been in the basement around that door and had somehow gotten out. Or had they? Were they real, or was this his exhausted mind creating hallucinations? He couldn't tell anymore. Reality and nightmare had blurred together. The footsteps stopped outside his door. Matthias held his breath, staring at the door, watching the gap at the bottom. A shadow moved across it, something large, something that blocked the hallway light completely. The door handle turned slowly, testing the lock. It didn't open. The lock held. Something breathed on the other side. A rattling, liquid sound that suggested damaged lungs or no lungs at all. Just air moving through a structure that approximated breathing without actually being alive. The handle stopped turning. After a long moment, seconds or minutes or hours, time had lost all meaning. The footsteps moved on, dragging down the hallway, down the stairs, heading back toward the basement, or deeper into the villa, or nowhere because they'd never been real at all. At 6 o'clock exactly, Matthias's alarm chirped. The sound was jarringly normal, mundane, a reminder that ordinary time still existed outside this nightmare. He forced himself out of bed. His legs felt like water, his hands shook uncontrollably, but he made himself move. Down the stairs, down to the basement level, where dawn light was just beginning to filter through a high, narrow window. The door stood closed, all 3 locks still in place, exactly as he'd left them. But the floor, around it, the floor was covered in new scratches that hadn't been there before. Deep gouges in the stone, as if something with claws had tried desperately to claw its way out, or in, or through to somewhere else entirely. Matthias approached with trembling hands and turned the keys. Bottom, middle, top. The locks released with solid clicks that echoed in the oppressive quiet. He opened the door. Anselm sat in the same chair, in exactly the same position, hands folded in his lap, face expressionless, as if he'd been sitting there frozen for the entire 6 hours, as if he'd never moved, never breathed, never existed as anything other than a statue of a boy. "Good morning, Father Matthias," the boy said in that flat, emotionless voice. The flatness somehow more terrible after the emotional assault of the night's voices. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for not opening the door. Breakfast is at 8 o'clock. I'll be hungry." He stood and walked past Matthias, his footsteps making no sound, leaving the priest standing in the doorway staring into the empty room. The symbols on the floor seemed to shift slightly in his peripheral vision, rearranging themselves into new patterns, and in the center of the floor, where no stain had been before, a dark mark had appeared, not blood, but something else. Something that seemed to absorb light, rather than reflect it, something that moved slightly when he looked directly at it, as if it were alive or connected to something alive in another place. Matthias backed away, closing the door quickly, locking it again with shaking hands, even though there was nothing inside anymore. Nothing physical, anyway. He stumbled upstairs, his entire body shaking with exhaustion and fear. He wanted to sleep, to escape into unconsciousness, but it was nearly 8 o'clock. Breakfast time. The schedule must be maintained. The routine that kept Anselm anchored and kept reality stable had to continue, no matter how much Matthias wanted to collapse. He prepared the meal mechanically, his hands moving through familiar motions, while his mind remained trapped in the basement, hearing those voices, feeling the weight of all that grief and accusation. At 8 o'clock exactly, he carried the food to the dining room. Anselm was already there, waiting, looking exactly as he always did. An 8-year-old boy in grey clothing, hands folded, face empty of expression. But Matthias saw him differently now. Saw past the surface to something else, something vast and terrible, wearing a child-sized mask. Something that connected to realms where the dead wandered, and ancient entities waited hungrily for doorways to open. They ate in silence. Anselm with his mechanical precision, exactly 12 chews per bite, water between every 3 mouthfuls, clockwork consistency. Matthias barely tasted his food, just forcing it down because his body needed fuel, even if his mind rejected nourishment. "You did well," Anselm said finally, breaking the silence. Most guardians come very close to opening the door their first time. Some actually do it. Those don't last long. They see what floods through in those first moments before I can seal it again, and their minds just break, like glass under pressure, shattered into fragments that can never be made whole. What would have happened if I'd opened it? They would have come through, all of them. The consciousnesses trapped in that grey place. Every human who has ever died, existing in superposition across all their moments, desperate to collapse back into singular existence. They would have used me as a doorway, as a bridge between their realm and yours. and once they started flooding through, there would be no stopping it. Your reality would rip like wet paper. Physics would cease to function consistently. Time would become non-linear everywhere, not just around me. And every living person would suddenly become aware of every dead person, every entity, every consciousness that has ever existed. The weight of that awareness would shatter human minds instantly. Billions of people, all experiencing complete temporal dissolution simultaneously. It would be the end of everything, not through violence or destruction, but through too much consciousness trying to occupy too little space. Why did they use my brother's voice, my mother's? Because those are the voices you trust. The voices that can bypass your rational defenses and speak directly to your grief, your guilt, your love. They're not actually your loved ones, Father Matthias. They're echoes. Memories pulled from your mind by my presence, given temporary voice by entities that have learned to manipulate human emotion. Your brother's consciousness doesn't exist in that place. Not the way you think of consciousness. Not as Luca with his personality and memories intact. But the shape of him does. The impression he left on you. And those entities can access those impressions and weaponize them. That's monstrous. That's survival. They're trapped there, desperate to escape, willing to use any tool available. They don't hate you, Father Matthias. They don't feel anything about you specifically. You're just a potential doorway, a possible escape route, and they'll say or do anything to convince you to open that door. They're not evil, they're not good. They're just consciousnesses trying to exist in a way that makes sense to them, but what makes sense to them would destroy you and everyone else. Anselm finished his breakfast and stood. You should rest today. Sleep if you can. The first Sunday is always the hardest. Your body and mind need recovery time. I'll be in my room if you need me, though I hope you won't. Most guardians avoid me for several days. After their first lockdown, I understand why. Seeing what I really do, understanding what I really am, it changes how you perceive me. Changes how you perceive everything. He left, and Matthias sat alone at the dining table, staring at nothing, trying to process what he'd experienced, trying to understand how he was supposed to survive 6 more Sundays like that. 23 more if he lasted the full 6 months that most guardians achieved. He couldn't do it. He knew that with absolute certainty. One night had nearly broken him. 6 more would definitely finish the job. But he also knew he couldn't leave yet, couldn't request transfer after just 1 week. The church needed guardians who lasted at least a few months, who documented enough experiences to help future guardians survive slightly longer. He had a duty, an obligation, so he would stay, would try to last as long as possible, would follow the rules and maintain the schedule, and count the seconds and burn the drawings and pretend that impossible things were normal. And slowly, inevitably, he would break, just like all the others before him. The second week brought new horrors as Matthias's perception began to shift in ways he couldn't control or reverse. On Monday, he caught himself staring at Anselm for 35 seconds during breakfast. When he finally looked away, he felt strange, disconnected, as if time had skipped forward in tiny increments he couldn't perceive. He found himself in the kitchen with no memory of walking there, found dishes washed that he didn't remember cleaning. On Tuesday, Anselm began drawing obsessively. Matthias found him at the dining room table in the afternoon, surrounded by papers, his hand moving with mechanical precision across the page. The boy didn't look up, didn't acknowledge Matthias's presence, just kept drawing with total focus. Matthias approached cautiously, meaning to gather the drawings and burn them as instructed, but he caught a glimpse of the image before he could stop himself. A landscape of grey stone under a grey sky. Buildings that hurt to look at, their architecture violating geometric principles. In ways that made his brain ache, that suggested spaces folding in on themselves, doorways leading into dimensions that shouldn't exist. A sky that contained too many layers, as if multiple skies existed in the same space, overlapping and interpenetrating. And figures, those humanoid shapes, with wrong proportions, moving through the landscape with purposeful intent. The image burned into his mind instantly, perfectly, as if etched directly onto his consciousness. Even after he looked away, gathered the papers, carried them to the courtyard fireplace and set them alight, you could still see it with perfect clarity. Every line, every shadow, every impossible angle was preserved in his memory, like a photograph. That night, when he closed his eyes, the grey place was waiting for him. He walked through it in his dreams, but it didn't feel like dreaming. It felt like being somewhere real, somewhere solid, somewhere that existed with more permanence than the waking world. The landscape was exactly as Anselm had drawn it. Grey stone, impossible architecture, that oppressive sky pressing down. And he wasn't alone. The entities were there. Those humanoid shapes he'd glimpsed in the drawings. They noticed him immediately, turning their attention toward him with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. One approached, and as it came closer, the wrongness became apparent. It looked almost human at first. Head, torso, arms, legs in approximately the right places. But as it got closer, the details resolved wrong. The arms had too many joints bending in the middle, and at the wrists and at points where no joints should exist. The fingers branched and subdivided, like fractals, each one splitting into smaller fingers that split into smaller fingers still. The face shifted subtly with each step, as if it couldn't quite remember what human features should look like and kept adjusting its approximation. It spoke in a voice that bypassed sound entirely, resonating directly in Matthias's consciousness. You've been marked. The child has claimed you. You belong to this place now. Part of you is already here, and more comes with each passing day. No, Matthias said, or tried to say. His voice didn't produce sound in this place. I'm just dreaming. Dreams are windows. Windows can become doors. You'll come back here every night now, and each time you'll go deeper, learn more, see clearer, until one night you won't wake up at all. You'll stay here, join us, become like us, neither alive nor dead, just existing in all moments, simultaneously, experiencing your entire life at once, forever. Other entities gathered around him, their forms flickering between solid and translucent. They all spoke at once, their voices overlapping in his mind. Welcome home. You've always belonged here. The child showed you the way. You can never leave. This is where all guardians come eventually. This is where all aware minds come when they die. Not heaven, not hell, just grey, just cold, just eternal superposition. Matthias woke screaming, sitting bolt upright in bed, gasping for air. Afternoon light slanted through his window. He'd slept for hours, lost time he couldn't account for, but he felt more exhausted than before, as if he'd been running all night rather than resting. He looked at his hands and felt his breath catch. On his left forearm, a bruise had appeared, 5 dark marks in the pattern of fingerprints, but the spacing was wrong. The fingers that had gripped him had too many joints, just like the entity in his dream. The marks were real, physical, visible. Dreams didn't leave physical evidence. The barrier between sleeping and waking, between here and that grey place, was breaking down. He was becoming permeable. The realization sent ice through his veins. 1 week. He'd lasted 1 week, and already the process had begun. The spreading across moments, the dissolution of self, the transformation into something that existed partially here and partially there. How long did he have? Weeks? Days? The 3rd week was a descent into unreality. Time became increasingly unreliable. Matthias would sit down to read at 9 in the morning and look up to find it was 3 in the afternoon. with no memory of the intervening hours. But evidence of activity remained. Meals prepared and eaten, journal entries written in his own handwriting that he didn't remember composing, conversations with Anselm that left no impression in his memory. He read one of these mystery entries with mounting horror, spoke with Anselm for 2 hours today. He explained the grey place in detail, not another dimension or parallel universe, but the space between quantum states, the realm where consciousness exists when not collapsed into a single reality. All possible states exist there simultaneously. Past, present, future, all branching timelines, all potential outcomes. The entities there aren't monsters. They're consciousnesses that have learned to exist in superposition permanently. They're neither alive nor dead because those categories only apply to consciousness collapsed into a single timeline. When we die, our consciousness doesn't go to heaven or hell. It goes there, spreads across all the moments we ever inhabited, exists in all states at once, forever. That's what he's trying to show me. That's what all guardians eventually learn. And once you understand it completely, you can't stay collapsed into a single timeline anymore. You start to spread out too, to exist in multiple moments, simultaneously, to become like them. Matthias stared at the entry, not remembering writing a single word. His handwriting, his pen, his journal, but someone else's thoughts, or his own thoughts from hours he couldn't remember, hours where he'd been somewhere else, learning things he wasn't ready to know. Thursday brought more drawings, dozens of them scattered across Anselm's room when Matthias went to collect the boy for lunch, each one showing that grey landscape from different angles, different perspectives, different moments in tow, or perhaps all moments simultaneously, the way Anselm perceived them. Matthias gathered them mechanically, carried them to the fireplace, set them alight. But watching them burn, he realized something terrible. He could reconstruct every image from memory now. They were imprinted on his consciousness permanently, as indelible as childhood memories, as permanent as his own name. The grey place was becoming more familiar than the villa, more real than reality. Friday, Anselm appeared in a locked storage room. Matthias had checked it minutes before. Empty, locked, no way in or out. But when he returned with cleaning supplies, Anselm was sitting on a shelf among the linens, smiling that empty smile. "You're noticing more now," the boy said, as if continuing a conversation they'd been having. "Your perception is sharpening. You're starting to see how I actually exist. Not confined to a single point in space, but spread across multiple locations simultaneously. Most people's brains edit that out, show them only one instance of me at a time. But you're seeing past the editing now. Soon you'll see everything. All my instances at once. All the places I am and have been and will be. It's beautiful in a way. Terrible, but beautiful." Rule 7. Act normal, show no surprise. Matthias gathered his cleaning supplies and left without acknowledging the impossibility, but his hands shook for hours. That night's dream was the most vivid yet. He walked deeper into the grey place than ever before, and the geography began to make a kind of terrible sense. If he thought of distance as emotional rather than physical, if he understood that movement required changing his state of consciousness rather than moving his body, the wrongness became almost logical. Almost comprehensible. The entities were closer now, more interested. They gathered around him like curious animals, studying something new and strange. One, the one with too many joints, spoke directly into his mind. "You're learning faster than most. The child likes you. He's showing you more than he usually shows, preparing you. You'll be ready soon." Ready for what? To cross over completely. To stop existing primarily in linear time and spread out across all your moments. To become one of us. To join the eternal grey. Father Ignatius lasted 2 years before he was ready. But you're progressing much faster. 3 months maybe. 4 at most. and then you'll be here permanently, and we'll finally have someone new to talk to. It gets lonely, existing in all moments, simultaneously. Conversation requires sequence, requires turn-taking, requires linear time, and there's so little of that here. I don't want to cross over. I don't want any of this. Want is irrelevant. You've been marked. You perceive us now. And once perception begins, it cannot be stopped. Each night you'll see more, understand more, until you see so clearly that you can't exist solely in your reality anymore. Part of you will always be here, and eventually all of you will be here. When Matthias woke, the bruises had spread further up his arm, across his shoulder, appearing on his chest. Handprints with wrong proportions, fingerprints with too many joints, evidence that the things from that grey place were touching him with increasing frequency, marking their claim, pulling him incrementally toward their realm. The fourth Sunday arrived, the second lockdown. This time Matthias knew what was coming. The anticipation was almost worse than the experience itself. He spent the day in a state of mounting dread, unable to eat, unable to focus, counting down the hours until midnight. At 11:30 p.m, he led Anselm to the basement. The ritual was familiar now. The walk down stone corridors, the heavy door, the 3 locks, the symbol-covered floor. "Remember," Anselm said before Matthias closed the door, "no matter what you hear, no matter whose voice calls, don't open this door until 6 a.m, because they are stronger this week. They've had time to learn your weaknesses, to refine their approach. They know exactly what to say now, exactly how to hurt you, and you're weaker than you were, more permeable, more spread out across moments, less anchored to singular existence. It'll be harder to resist this time. I'll hold firm. I hope so, I really do, because if you open this door..." Anselm looked at him with something that might have been genuine concern. "I can't protect you if you open it. I can filter them, control the flow, meter their access. But if you bypass me, if you open a direct channel, they'll flood through you. All of them. And you'll be the gateway through which billions of desperate consciousnesses pour into your world. You'll be ground zero for the end of everything. And you'll be aware of it happening, spread across all moments, experiencing the apocalypse you caused from every possible perspective, simultaneously, forever." Matthias closed the door, locked it, fled upstairs. Midnight. The sounds began immediately, louder, more aggressive, more desperate than before. The scratching was frantic, as if thousands of hands clawed at stone simultaneously. The whispers became shouts, the shouts became screams, the screams became something beyond sound entirely, and his brother's voice clearer and more insistent than ever. "Matty, I know you can hear me, I know you're there. You left me last week, you heard me suffering, and you walked away. How could you do that? I'm your brother, your blood, and you abandoned me to the dark." The voice was accusatory now, angry from the start, skipping past pleading directly to rage. "I've been in this grey place for 16 years because of you. You were supposed to drive me that night, remember? I asked you for a ride, but you said no, said you were too tired, said I should drive myself. And then I died. And now I'm trapped here, experiencing my death over and over, simultaneously feeling every moment of my life, including that final impact. The steering wheel crushing my chest, the windshield spiderwebbing across my vision, dying and dying and dying forever. And it's your fault." Matthias pressed his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. His brother's voice was inside his skull, internal and impossible to escape. "You could free me. You could end my suffering. Just open the door. Just let me through. I deserve that much. After everything, after dying while you slept safely in your bed, I deserve to be released." Other voices joined. His mother, his father, his grandmother, friends and teachers and comrades. But this time they weren't pleading. They were furious. Selfish, selfish child. I gave you life and this is how you repay me. Coward! You call yourself a priest, but you leave souls to suffer. We died for you. We sacrificed for you. And you can't even open a door. The accusations built and built, a crescendo of rage and disappointment and hatred from everyone he'd ever loved. Every relationship reduced to its failures. Every connection poisoned by the memory of how it ended. At 1 a.m. the voices changed tactics again. They became seductive, tempting. Matty, his brother's voice, soft now, almost a whisper. I'm not really angry. I'm just hurting. And I miss you. Don't you miss me? Don't you want to see me again? If you open the door, we can be together. You can join me here. It's not so bad once you adjust. You experience everything at once, every happy moment, every triumph, every joy. Yes, you also experience the pain, but it's all mixed together, all happening simultaneously. The good and bad averaged out across eternity. It's actually peaceful in a way. Come here, Matty. Come be with your brother. Come home. At 2 a.m, a different voice spoke. One Matthias didn't recognize. Father Corvain, listen to me. I'm Father Silvanus, the first guardian. I died 70 years ago, and I've been in this place ever since. I know what you're feeling. I know what they're promising you. And I need you to understand something. They're not lying exactly, but they're not telling you the whole truth either. Matthias froze, listening intently. If you open that door, Father Silvanus's voice continued, calm and measured, you won't free anyone. You'll trap everyone. Every living person will become permeable instantly. Every human consciousness will spread across all their moments simultaneously. 8 billion people, all suddenly experiencing their entire lives at once, unable to cope with that perception. It'll be madness on a global scale. Reality will fragment. Time will become non-linear everywhere. And the suffering will be infinite and eternal. Is that what you want? Matthias's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know what I want anymore. You want peace, everyone does. But this isn't the path to it. Your brother is already experiencing his life in superposition. The grey place isn't torture or prison. It's just what happens to consciousness after death. Opening this door won't save him. It'll doom billions of others to premature dissolution. Go back upstairs. Survive this night. And tomorrow consider requesting transfer. Leave this place. Live whatever time you have left in the normal world. Don't let them use you as a doorway. But if everyone ends up in the grey place anyway, if death leads there for everyone, what difference does it make? Why delay the inevitable? Because the living of life matters. The experiencing of moments one at a time, in sequence with the illusion of choice and progress and meaning, that has value. Even if it all eventually spreads out into eternal superposition, the journey matters, the story matters. Don't rob humanity of that. Don't condemn billions to premature awareness of their own temporal dissolution. Matthias stood frozen on the stairs, 2 voices warring in his mind. His brothers pleading for release and this stranger's, warning of catastrophe. Matty, don't listen to him, Luca's voice, desperate now, frantic. He's lying. He's trying to keep us trapped. Silvanus wants to maintain the barrier because he's afraid of change, afraid of what comes after. But you can free us. You can... I'm sorry, Luca, Matthias heard himself say, his voice breaking. I'm sorry for everything, for not being there, for not saving you, for being alive when you're not. But I can't do this. I can't doom everyone else to ease your suffering. I can't be the one who ends the world. He turned and climbed back up the stairs, each step requiring monumental effort, fighting against the pull of every voice, every memory, every promise of reunion and understanding. Behind him, the voices rose to a crescendo of fury, screaming, wailing, cursing him with words in languages that predated human speech. The sound was overwhelming, a tsunami of rage and despair that crashed against his consciousness like physical force, trying to drag him back down, trying to compel him to return, to open the door, to let them through. But he kept climbing, kept moving forward, kept resisting. At 3 a.m, something new happened. The cursing stopped. What replaced it was worse. Laughter. Not human laughter, but something mechanical and mirthless. A sound that suggested consciousness without emotion, intelligence without empathy, awareness without humanity. And then a voice he'd never heard before, deep and resonant and impossibly old. Interesting. This one has more will than most, but will alone won't save you, Father Matthias Corvain. You crossed the threshold of perception 2 weeks ago. You saw us clearly. You understood what we are. And once we are seen, we cannot be unseen. Every moment of your remaining life, you will see us. In shadows, in reflections, in dreams. We will be there, always waiting. And when you die, whether tomorrow or in 50 years, you will join us. You will spread across all your moments. You will exist in this very moment forever, hearing these words, feeling this fear, knowing what awaits. This moment will be eternal for you. So enjoy your small victory tonight. It changes nothing. You are already ours. You just haven't finished dying yet. The presence withdrew, taking all sound with it. Absolute silence fell, oppressive and complete, the kind of silence that suggests the absence not just of sound, but of the possibility of sound. Matthias lay in his bed until dawn, understanding with terrible clarity that the voice was right. He had bought humanity a reprieve, yes, had prevented catastrophe for another week, but bought himself nothing. His fate was sealed. He was already more in the grey place than in linear reality, already dying, just very, very slowly. The bruises covered most of his torso now, dark handprints with impossible proportions, evidence that he was being pulled incrementally toward that other realm, claimed by entities that existed in eternal superposition. At 6 a.m, he forced himself to the basement and unlocked the door. Anselm sat in his chair, unchanged, but when he looked at Matthias, his expression was different. Something like respect or acknowledgement, or perhaps pity. You resisted again? Twice now. Most guardians don't resist twice. The pressure becomes too great, the promises too tempting, the suffering too intense. But you held firm. That's remarkable, Father Matthias. Futile ultimately, but remarkable. They climbed the stairs together in silence. How much longer do I have? Matthias asked. Before you spread completely? 3 weeks, maybe a month. You're progressing very rapidly now. Last night's resistance cost you dearly. Fighting them requires tremendous energy, and that energy comes from your remaining solidity, your anchoring to singular existence. You burned through weeks of stability in a single night. I can see it in you. The way you flicker slightly when I look at you, as if you're not entirely here anymore, as if you're already existing partially in multiple moments. So I'm dying, you're transforming. Death is just the final step of a process that's already well underway. You're becoming what I am, in a sense, something that exists in multiple moments simultaneously. The difference is that I maintain focus through will and ancient practice, while you'll diffuse uncontrollably. I'll remain centered here, in this form, in this role. You'll spread across all the moments of your life, like water seeking its level, experiencing everything at once, forever trapped in the superposition of your own timeline. They reached the ground floor. Morning light streamed through the windows, beautiful and normal, and utterly insufficient to dispel the darkness Matthias now carried inside himself. Why are you telling me this? Matthias asked. Because honesty is kinder than false hope. Father Ignatius left believing he might survive, might escape, might find some treatment or cure, but there is none. Once you've perceived us clearly, Once you've become permeable, the process is irreversible. I tell you the truth so you can make informed choices about your remaining time. You could request transfer now, spend your last weeks in the normal world, or you could stay, document your experiences for future guardians, help them last slightly longer than you did. Either way, the ending is the same. You'll spread across all your moments and join the eternal grey. But how you spend the time until then, that's still your choice. Matthias prepared breakfast mechanically, his hands shaking, his mind numb. At 8 o'clock they ate in silence, Anselm with his mechanical precision. Matthias barely able to taste the food, barely able to remember why eating mattered when his body was becoming increasingly irrelevant. After breakfast, he went to his room and wrote a letter to Cardinal Tessero. "Your Eminence, I am requesting immediate transfer. After 4 weeks of service, I have reached the threshold of perception that previous guardians have documented. I am no longer solid enough to serve effectively. My consciousness is spreading across multiple temporal states simultaneously. I am becoming permeable, marked by the entities from that grey place, pulled incrementally toward eternal superposition. I estimate I have between 3 and 4 weeks before complete dissolution. I would prefer to spend that time away from this villa, away from Anselm, in whatever peace can be found for someone in my condition. I understand this is a shorter term than desired. I apologize for my weakness, my inability to maintain solidity longer, but I cannot continue. The alternative is opening the door during Sunday lockdown, and I will not let that happen. Better to leave now, while I still have enough will to resist. Please send my replacement as quickly as possible. Anselm should not be without a guardian for long. The consequences of leaving him unanchored are too terrible to risk. Father Matthias Corvain." He sealed the letter and left it on his desk. A courier came weekly to collect correspondence. It would be sent within days. The 5th and final week passed in a dreamlike haze. Matthias maintained the routines because he had no alternative. Meals at precise times, counting when looking at Anselm, burning the drawings, following the schedule. But he did all of it from increasing distance, as if operating his body by remote control from somewhere far away. The bruises covered him completely now. Arms, chest, back, face, legs. Dark marks shaped like hands with wrong proportions. Fingerprints with too many joints. Evidence that he was more in that grey place than here. More claimed by those entities than anchored to linear time. He saw them constantly now. They no longer hid in shadows or appeared only in peripheral vision. They walked through the villa openly, moving through walls and furniture with casual disregard for physical barriers. Sometimes they stopped to look at him, tilting their misshapen heads in curiosity or recognition, as if greeting someone who was almost family, almost one of them, almost home. Anselm noticed but said nothing. What was there to say? This was the inevitable progression. Every guardian reached this point eventually. On Tuesday, Matthias had a visitor, though visitor wasn't quite the right word. He was reading in the library when he looked up and saw a man standing across from him. The man wore priest's vestments from several decades past and looked to be in his early 60s. He appeared solid and real, but Matthias could see the bookshelf through his body. "Father Ignatius," Matthias said, recognizing him from photographs in the archives, though this man looked older, more worn than in those pictures. Father Corvain. The ghost, or echo, or temporal overlap, or whatever he was, smiled sadly. "I wanted to warn you, but you're already too far gone. I can see it. The way you flicker between moments. The way you're barely here anymore." Are you really Father Ignatius, or am I hallucinating? Does it matter? I'm an echo of my time here, existing in the moments I served, accessible to those who've become permeable enough to perceive across temporal boundaries. I'm as real as anything is real anymore. He sat in a chair, the motion smooth despite his translucence. I died 2 weeks after leaving here. Heart attack, they said. But it wasn't my heart that failed, it was my cohesion. I spread too far, too fast, and my body couldn't maintain itself without central consciousness to anchor it. The autopsy showed I was experiencing multiple moments simultaneously at the time of death. My brain activity suggested I was living through several different timeframes at once. Birth, childhood, priesthood, guardianship, death, all happening simultaneously in my neurons. No wonder my heart stopped. The temporal strain was too great. What's it like, the grey place? Overwhelming at first. You experience every moment of your life at once with equal intensity. I'm sitting here talking to you right now. I'm also in seminary as a young man, full of hope and faith. I'm also dying in my apartment, alone and terrified. I'm also being born, screaming my first breath. All of it happening simultaneously, constantly, forever. There's no progression, no narrative, no sense of moving forward or backward. Just eternal present spread across all the moments I ever inhabited. That sounds like hell. It's neither hell nor heaven. It's just what happens. The natural state of consciousness, once it's no longer tethered to a living body, moving through linear time. Life, singular, sequential experience, is the anomaly. The brief moment when consciousness collapses into a single point, experiences sequence, moves forward. Death returns you to the default state, eternal superposition. And once you're there, he paused, his form flickering slightly. Once you're there, you adjust, eventually. The first subjective eternity is pure confusion and panic. But gradually you begin to accept it, to understand it as the natural order. I'm experiencing that panic right now. In my moment of death, I'm also experiencing acceptance in what you might call later, though time doesn't work that way there. I'm suffering and at peace simultaneously, terrified and resigned, confused and understanding, all at once forever. Is there any comfort in it? Any peace? There's the peace of no longer fighting it. The peace of accepting that this is simply what consciousness is when it's not artificially constrained to linear time. We spend our lives thinking of ourselves as singular entities moving forward through time, but that's an illusion. We're always spread across all our moments. We just don't perceive it while alive. Death removes the illusion, shows us what we've always been. Some find that liberating, others find it horrifying. Most find it both. I don't want to become that. No one does, but you already are. You're just experiencing the transition slowly, instead of all at once. When your body finally fails, you won't go to the grey place. You'll already be there. You'll just stop perceiving linear time entirely. The you sitting here now will become just one moment among many, no more or less present than any other moment of your life. Birth and death will be equally accessible, equally current, and this conversation, this specific moment, will be eternal. You'll always be here, hearing these words, feeling this fear, knowing what's coming, forever. Ignatius's form began to fade. I should go. Maintaining cohesion across temporal boundaries is exhausting even for me. And I'm fully in superposition now. Just remember, Father Corvain, what awaits isn't punishment. It's just what we are beneath the illusion of sequential existence. Accepting that makes the transition easier. Fighting it only prolongs the suffering. He disappeared, leaving Matthias alone in the library, surrounded by books about theology and metaphysics that suddenly seemed quaintly inadequate to describe the reality he was experiencing. On Wednesday, Cardinal Tesoro arrived. Matthias was in the garden when the car pulled up, trying to enjoy the sunlight and fresh air while he still had a body capable of experiencing them. He watched the Cardinal emerge, moving slowly, looking even older than he had 4 weeks ago. "You're leaving," Tesoro said when they sat in the courtyard. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I've lasted 4 weeks. Most break at 5 weeks, but I can't make it that long. I'm spreading too fast, dissolving too quickly. If I stay, I'll either lose cohesion completely, or I'll open the door during the next Sunday lockdown, and I won't let that happen. I won't be the one who ends the world. 4 weeks, shorter than we hoped, but longer than some. Tessero studied him with clinical detachment. I can see it in you. The marks, the way you seem to exist, slightly out of phase with the present moment. You're already more there than here. How long do I have? Weeks, maybe a month. You're progressing very rapidly, faster than most guardians. Strong initial perception often correlates with rapid dissolution. You saw too much too quickly, understood too clearly, and that understanding is what's killing you. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by beauty. Flowers blooming, birds singing, fountains splashing. All of it utterly normal, utterly insufficient to dispel the horror of what Matthias had become. Tell me the truth, Matthias said, all of it. What is he really? What is that grey place? Why does the church keep doing this? Tessero sighed heavily. We don't know what he is, not really. Something ancient, something that predates our understanding of reality. The monks in Slovakia didn't find him. They were keeping him just as monks before them had kept him, going back centuries. We've found references to him in texts from medieval Europe, from Byzantium, from Rome, from civilizations that existed before written history. Always the same pattern. A child who doesn't age, a keeper of doors, an anchor between realms. And the grey place? We have theories. Some believe it's the natural state of consciousness, that the dead don't go to heaven or hell, but simply spread across all their moments, experiencing their entire lives simultaneously in eternal superposition. Others think it's a separate realm, adjacent to ours, where time works differently. A few radical theologians suggest it's both, that consciousness naturally exists in superposition, and death simply removes the constraints that collapse us into linear experience. And the church perpetuates this, sends guardians here to die, generation after generation. Because the alternative is worse. If Anselm is left alone, if he loses his anchor to linear time, the barrier between realms breaks down. Reality itself becomes unstable. We've seen it happen during the brief periods when we had no guardian. People seeing the dead, time becoming non-linear, the laws of physics becoming negotiable. And if it continues long enough, if Anselm drifts completely... Tessero's voice dropped. We believe every consciousness that has ever existed would flood into our world simultaneously. 8 billion living minds would suddenly experience the weight of all the dead from all of time. Billions, trillions of consciousnesses, all trying to exist in the same space. The strain would shatter reality itself. So, we're sacrifices, human anchors offered up to prevent apocalypse. Yes, I'm sorry. When we recruited you, we believed you were strong enough to last longer. We were wrong. He stood slowly. Your replacement arrives tomorrow. Father Cyril, young, faithful, disciplined. Perhaps he'll last longer than you did. Perhaps not. What happens to me now? We'll assign you to a remote parish, Alaska, as far from populated areas as possible. You'll have support, counselling, medication if it helps. But Father Corvain... He paused. You have perhaps a month, maybe less. When you die, make peace with what you're becoming. Fight it and the transition will be agony. Accept it and... well, it won't be pleasant, but it will be easier. That's supposed to be comforting? It's the only comfort I can offer. Through the window, Anselm watched them, standing perfectly still, his hand raised in that slow wave, his smile never wavering. The ancient thing that wore a child's shape, the anchor that kept the dead from flooding the living, the keeper of doors between realms. Matthias waved back, a gesture of farewell to the thing that had destroyed him, marked him, claimed him. In a month, he would join the eternal grey, would spread across all his moments, would exist in this very instant forever, sitting in this courtyard saying goodbye to the creature that had shown him the true nature of consciousness and death, forever. The word suddenly meant something different now. Not a duration, but a state of being. Not endless time, but all time simultaneously. Not eternity as sequence, but eternity as eternal present. He was already there, he realized. Already experiencing this moment and all other moments at once. The perception of linear time was just habit now. Momentum carrying him forward even though he was already spread out, already diffused, already dead in all but the final formality of his body's cessation. "Goodbye, Your Eminence," Matthias said. "Go with God, Father Corvain. Though I suspect..." Tessero trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. "Though I suspect God stopped watching this place long ago," Matthias completed silently. "Or perhaps God is watching, and this is exactly what consciousness is supposed to be. Eternal, spread across all moments, experiencing everything simultaneously. Perhaps heaven and hell and the grey place are all the same thing, just perceived differently depending on whether you accept or resist what you've become." That night, Matthias packed his few belongings. Tomorrow he would leave. Tomorrow a new guardian would arrive. Tomorrow the cycle would continue. Another priest sacrificed to keep reality stable, to keep the dead from flooding the living, to keep Anselm anchored in linear time. He lay in bed for the last time, listening to the footsteps in the hallway, Anselm's endless pacing, the eternal walk through all moments simultaneously. And Matthias understood now. Anselm wasn't pacing. He was existing in all positions, along the hallway at once, and Matthias was just perceiving the echo of that simultaneous existence as sequential footsteps. Everything was simultaneous. Everything was eternal present. Everything was and is and always would be, happening all at once, forever. He closed his eyes and saw the grey place waiting, not as a destination but as something he'd always been in, was in now, would always be in. The villa and the grey place occupied the same space, separated only by the thinness of perception, by the artificial boundary of linear consciousness. He was already home, already spread across all his moments, already experiencing his birth and death and every second in between, simultaneously. The transition to full awareness would just be the removal of the last illusion, the illusion that he was only here, only now, only this singular moment. And that illusion was already so thin he could see through it. 3 weeks later, in a small parish in Alaska, Father Matthias Corvain was found dead in his bed. The official cause was listed as heart failure. He was 34 years old. The priest who found him noted that his eyes were open, staring at something no one else could see. His face bore an expression of, not peace exactly, not terror either. Something between acceptance and wonder, as if he'd finally understood something profound and was still processing the implications. On his desk was a journal, the final entry dated the night before. "I'm writing this knowing I'll always be writing it. That this moment, pen in hand, words flowing, understanding finally complete, will be eternal. Tomorrow, I'll die, but I'm already dead. I'm also being born. I'm also a child. I'm also in the villa. I'm also spread across every moment I've ever existed in. Anselm was right. Death isn't an ending. It's a spreading out, a diffusion across all the moments we've inhabited. And consciousness doesn't go to heaven or hell. It goes everywhere at once. All our moments simultaneously, forever. I'm not afraid anymore. Fear requires anticipating the future, but there is no future. There's only the eternal now, stretched across all moments of my existence. To whoever reads this, likely Father Cyril, or whoever comes after him, Know that what awaits isn't punishment. It's just what we are beneath the illusion of sequential time. Accept it. Don't fight it. Fighting only makes the transition more painful, and I'm ready now. Ready to stop pretending I'm only this moment and accept that I'm all moments. Ready to let go of linear existence and embrace eternal superposition. See you in the grey. We're all there already. We just don't know it yet. The journal was sealed by the Vatican and added to the archives, joining dozens of others from previous guardians, all documenting the same progression, the same dissolution, the same ultimate understanding. In Rome, in a villa in the Italian countryside, a boy sits in his room, always 8 years old, always watching, always waiting. Father Cyril, the new guardian, prepares breakfast at exactly 8 o'clock. He counts to 30 while looking at the boy's face, then looks away. He answers questions with only yes or no. He burns the drawings without studying them. He follows the rules. For now. But eventually, inevitably, he will break. He will see too much. He will understand too clearly. And he will spread across all his moments just like all the others before him. The cycle continues, has always continued, will always continue, because someone must anchor the child who doesn't age. Someone must keep the dead from flooding the living. Someone must sacrifice themselves to maintain the barrier between sequential consciousness and eternal superposition. And in the grey place, in the space between moments where all consciousness ultimately resides, Father Matthias Corvain exists in all his moments simultaneously. Birth and death and everything in between, all happening at once, forever. He's there now, has always been there, will always be there, as are we all.